Chapter 1937. The Black Dragon used her fingertips to control the fire elements to help Duque roast chicken wings. Vashj, on the other hand, held her cheeks and used the water element to control the front line. From another perspective, if the living resources were abundant, who would be willing to let their relatives and friends cut off their own lives? Duque hid in Naxxramas and still did not show his face in public. Unfortunately, as long as it was a livelihood, it needed strong economic support. At this time, not many people noticed that they had actually entered Pandaria and were beginning to be affected by Yashaji's murderous aura. It was normal for Vashj not to show up personally. Generally speaking, gods had their own style. Even demigods did not come out so easily. Beastmen were ruthless to others and also to their own people. This should be considered a subsidiary of a subsidiary. Although there were small islands scattered around the jadeite forest in the southwest, the altitude was lower. Other than those dam reefs, it was one of the few options for ships to reach Pandaria. It was late at night, there was no moonlight, and the visibility was frighteningly low. This was also amazing. Even if the route was deviated, it should go to the Mantis Plateau in the west, or the Beast Island in the north. Traditional beastmen would despise those cowards who were injured and disabled on the battlefield but shamelessly lived on and occupied the clan's living resources. They contacted and helped the local Pandaren in the jadeite forest to remove the other party's control. The Pandaren of Sweet Dew Village and the Horde defeated the Alliance army in the north. The Pandaren of Morningwind Village and the Alliance defeated the Horde army in the south. The effects of the war began to appear. The Pandaren sent Zhou Xian to personally try to stop the war, but to no avail. Master, it's done. I sent Carathelas to negotiate. Now the pearl-finned wraiths have agreed to join Master's water elemental army. Vashj smiled. In a situation where there was not enough food, the old and the weak were abandoned. This was a matter of course for traditional beastmen, but Sal could not accept it. In a sense, Sal's way of doing things in the Horde was not bad. Oh, it's really simple. It was an exaggeration to say that it was a song, but it was just a random humming. Just like the Alliance, all kinds of post-war bills and war bills implemented a social security system. It ensured the continuation of the bloodline of the soldiers who sacrificed themselves for the Alliance and the safety of their loved ones. That was why the soldiers were united and fearless of sacrifice. Now, with the 4 great elemental lords and the support of Fate's hands, the pearl-finned goldfish people in the jadeite forest were willing to join the Alliance. They weren't even considered a subsidiary race because they relied on the subsidiary races of the Alliance. Almost every tribe warrior threw the blame to the Alliance. This clockwise turn from the northwest to the southwest was simply a crazy flight route. The most brain-dead thing was that the flight route actually passed right in front of Naxxramas, which was flying west. It was precisely because of the lack of survival resources that the tribe developed such a barbaric and violent tradition. Not to raise trash. That was because they couldn't really enter the Pandaria region after reaching the shore. In the original history, the Alliance ship Heaven Seeker, which was escorting the tribal prisoners of war, had crashed on the back of the giant turtle, causing the giant turtle to almost be sucked into the giant whirlpool and self-destruct. Some of the Pandaren on the island joined the Alliance and the Horde under the leadership of the Water and Earth factions Monk Aisha Cloud Song and the Fire Gold factions G Fire Palm. Their heroic self-destruction attracted sharks and other creatures in the sea. That kind of mournful mood triggered a further reaction. For example, during the second battle of the Dark Portal, the orc warlock Necros, who helped the Dragonmaw clan chief Zulu Hid control Alexstrasza, was despised by his clansmen and even the entire tribe because he was lame. The old had no one to rely on and the young had no one to raise. He was in a good mood, humming a song as he ate the barbecue. I'll just quietly watch you court death and I won't interrupt you. You're stupid and you're sending yourself to death. Duque, a guy who became a god as Immortal, was definitely an exception. Everyone knew that Duke never thought of himself as a high and mighty god. The surviving troops of the Alliance and the Horde set up military camps in the north and south of the jadeite forest, forcing the local Pandaren to work in preparation for the war. But after asking, Duque didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Of course, there wouldn't be any Xianxia in this life. Suddenly, a secret communication was connected and Jaina immediately said, "Not good. The Horde is in trouble." Several airships had crashed on the island of Disorientation, which was the body of the giant sea turtle Xianxia. And one of the airships smashed into the big turtle's head. Xianxia should have fainted. He seems to be drifting in the direction of the Great Maelstrom. As long as they didn't light up the lights, the Horde's airships, which relied on their vision to search for the enemy, would probably be able to maintain silence and fly within 3 kilometers without the Horde noticing. Bulang Bronzebeard looked at the dense dots on the radar, each of which represented a Horde airship. He couldn't help but complain, damn it. Getting rid of these Horde now is easier than killing wild ducks by the pond with an old-fashioned gun 100 years ago. Beside him, Vashj and Onyxia looked like they had been left out. What the hell? Under Brainless Roar's mysterious navigator, they first deviated east, then went straight south and finally made a miraculous turn west to land in the Jade Forest area. Normally, the shortest route from Orgrimmar to Pandaria should be to Thunder God Island in the northwest of the Pandaria continent. After Sal came to power, the situation was much better. Of course, for the sake of their great commander's plan, the Alliance had to order Naxxramas and the thousands of airships around it to move north. The mystery of Pandaria was a mystery because there were many incredible places on this continent. Come on. For the end of the Horde. Jaina teased. This was equivalent to going in a big circle around Pandaria to reach their destination. Brainless Roar, you idiot. You're driving AF King's spaceship. Duque wanted to kill someone. Sometimes he also made things difficult for his subordinates. Yes, for the end of the Horde. At some point, hundreds of generals in the command center responded in unison. In the slave camp, Sal had seen too many tragedies. If it was a ship sailing on the sea, it really couldn't be said that the Horde was at fault. This was because the entire western, northwestern, and northern edges of the continent and islands of Pandaria were all steep stone walls that were hundreds of meters high. Without climbing tools, just reaching the shore was useless. Chapter 1938. First, the Alliance's flying ships had long since become all steel, powered by a diesel engine and a magic array anti-gravity system. Second, and most importantly, the naming method of the Alliance's warships had been monopolized by that bastard Duque. Duque rarely abused his power and wantonly named the Alliance's new warships after the Second World War ships on Earth. Except for the earliest Heavenbreaker, Duque monopolized all the naming rights for the new warships that followed. The dwarves and gnomes were also helpless. The glue rule was that whoever invented it named it. Although they were all flying ships, everyone knew that the new turbines, engines, power systems, and wind tunnel experiments on the hull construction of the second-generation pure diesel version of the flying warships were all done by Duque. Third, the latest version of the Alliance's flying warships, even the old diesel flying warships that had not yet been retired, were all equipped with anti-gravity emergency systems. Unless the hull was directly blown in half in mid-air, even if the power system was lost, the ship could still slowly descend after the emergency magic array was activated. To avoid the ship being destroyed and people dying, it was simply a sin. The tribal flying ships that had been wounded by the Alliance's Type 3 bombs and subcannons actually survived for more than 1,000 kilometers and crashed into the giant tortoise like dumplings falling into a pot near the Shenzhen. Duque's goal was to not destroy the ships even if people died. The effect was remarkable, but unfortunately there were side effects. Now it was clear that in order to escape, the tribe collectively made a large number of ships that could not withstand the emergency landing. When they saw a small island, they went to play crashing into the flying ships. Duque's mates had long been told that as long as Duque was not practicing swordsmanship inside, Storm and his nephew were to directly bring them in, so Vanessa opened the door. As soon as the door was opened, Duque heard the cries of the panda Loli Lily Storm. Big brother Duque, please save the lost island. Duque rushed to the secret monitoring room of Naxxramas with the two uncle and nephew as he promised. Well, no problem, the Alliance will not sit back and watch a friend die. Old Chin was a panda man who had lived for a long time, and he did not believe such words at first. Then he thought of Duque's other identity, the demigod of Azeroth. Old Chin fell silent. No matter what, as long as there was a glimmer of hope, no one wanted their hometown to be destroyed. The monitoring room was not far from Duque's study. It was also a special space attached to the center of Naxxramas. Inside, Duque's other maid, Solarian, had already opened a series of magic mirrors. Originally, Duque could have done this in his study, but Duque wanted it to be more formal. Xianxia might have a concussion. He's completely unconscious. According to the data sent by our scout ship, there seems to be a lump in its head caused by congestion. With Solarian's explanation, the uncle and nephew saw the head of their old home, the giant turtle swollen to the size of a goose. Crack. Old Xian suddenly clenched his fists because he saw battles erupting everywhere on Xinjian's back, which was the so-called Lost Island. In this day and age there were still no high-powered optical magnifiers. If the Alliance's scout ships wanted to obtain a clearer optical image, they could only let Morning Star wizards risk releasing Magician's Eye ahead. This small eye made of arcane magic could fly to a distance of about a kilometer and observe the situation at a close distance. The image was a little blurry, but it could still be clearly seen. A group of burly green-skinned warriors were slaughtering the black and white Pandaren. It was not a battle because Old Xian recognized at a glance that it was the Chihan winery he often went to. The bright red bamboo trees around seemed to have some magic, because their petals could maintain their former color for a few months after they were plucked. But at this moment they, along with the surrounding villages, were in a sea of fire. The ground was littered with the corpses of ordinary Pandaren. Orcs wielding battle axes were fighting the Pandaren from the Great Net Farm and Verdant Village, and even the warrior monks of Wuxian Temple. Seeing this scene, Duque almost laughed like a pig in his heart. He never thought that the tribe's intelligence would drop after following the brainless roar for so long. He didn't know if it was because they were provoked, but they actually attacked the Pandaren indiscriminately. This was a godlike assist to the Alliance. Old Xian gnawed on the bamboo leaf that he often held in his mouth. Duque knew that this old panda was most likely furious. His hometown was messed up by a group of people who used to be his friends. This feeling of betrayal was more annoying than a group of strange bandits suddenly coming to his door. Old Xian already had self-control not to go berserk on the spot. On the other side, Lily was crying non-stop. "Commander Marcus, do you have any good ideas?" Old Xian tried his best to make his voice sound calm. Duque, winner of the Azeroth Oscar, had a heavy expression on his face. "The tribe above is just a small problem. Later I will send a few fast airships. Old Xian, you will lead the Alliance's elites over and they will soon be suppressed. The key is Xinjian's coma." "Yes." Old Xian was still nervous. Lily, who was next to him, looked at Duque with a sorrowful expression. If Duque was a person overflowing with love like Kalia, he would probably immediately fall for that pair of watery black eyes. Duque didn't keep him in suspense and directly changed the topic. "Fortunately, the Alliance has experience in dealing with similar things. 30 years ago I used almost the same trick to save the lives of 50,000 elite soldiers of Storm City." Duque snapped his fingers and Vashj, who had followed him in, immediately began to transform. A six-armed Naga with a snake tail startled Old Xian and his nephew. Vashj crossed her 6 arms in front of her chest and bowed to Old Xian and his nephew. "I am Vashj, Master Marcus Maid. Currently I am in charge of the tidal throne on behalf of Master. I command 200,000 Naga warriors and 2 million fishmen." The simple introduction caused Old Xian's heart to tremble. He had long heard that the Alliance was amazing with several demigods overseeing it. But he really didn't know that the Alliance was so amazing. However, Vashj explained to Old Xian in a few words how Duke used a weak Murloc clan to drag a huge block of ice to save the people. After listening, Old Xian's blood surged and his heart thumped in his chest. "As long as we can save the Lost Island, the Alliance will be a friend of the Pandaren forever," Old Xian solemnly declared. If Old Xian was the leader of the Pandaren, he would probably swear to let the Pandaren join the Alliance. Unfortunately, Old Xian was not. The official leader of the Pandaren was Xiaohao. The problem was that this Pandaren emperor, who had the same name as the mythical character from before Duque transmigrated, had been hanging for 10,000 years. Chapter 1939. In the ancient war, the Night Elves went overboard and attracted President Shaman to worship them like a god. In the end, they blew up the Well of Eternity in the ancient Kalimdor continent. The Pandaren emperor, Emperor Xiaohao, calmly raised his staff in front of all the people and cast a spell. The entire Pandaria broke free from the main continent of Kalimdor, like a huge Noah's Ark, quietly and alone drifted into the depths of the sea. At the same time, a thick fog rose from the surrounding sea, carefully wrapping the entire Pandaria continent. From then on, Pandaria was hidden and no longer harassed by the outside world. Seeing that their home was finally saved, all the Pandaren couldn't hold back their excitement. They couldn't wait to cheer and celebrate. The entire Pandaria began to celebrate. Every Pandaren was jumping and laughing happily, celebrating their survival. Unexpectedly, just as the panda people were celebrating, Emperor Xiaohao fell to the ground with a thud under everyone's watchful eyes. The emperor, who had worked his whole life to save his people, fell just like that and never got up again. Gradually, the emperor's entire body seemed to be disintegrated. Yes, he also turned into fog, lingering and becoming a part of the continent under the feet of his beloved people. This was the story of the last emperor of the Pandaren Empire. His legend had come to an end. The emperor was gone and the Pandaren Empire collapsed. In a standard sense, the various Pandaren forces were actually independent. This was why Duque valued Old Qin so much. In a sense, according to the later development of history, Old Qin could barely be said to be the leader of the Pandaren, because the activity of this uncle and nephew ran through the entire time node. Old Qin left. He sat on the high-speed battlecruiser Scharnhorst that Duque had specially prepared for him. She, her sister ship Nizanal, and several series destroyers formed a high-speed commando team and rushed to the Lost Island at maximum speed. Following on the ship were the most elite Marines of the Alliance, as well as an elite squad of the Silverhand Knights led by the female dwarf paladin, Lena Thunderspear. Why Lena? Firstly, it was too exaggerated to send out a marshal of Gavin Rad's level for such a small-scale battle. Secondly, dwarves were naturally forthright and it was easier for females to gain their approval than males. In the end it was her. When Old Qin and his nephew rushed to the Lost Island, the battle was still going on. The arrival of the Alliance's flying battleship had also caused the Pandaren to panic and overreact. The Alliance's ships that had received Duque's warning were very smart. Their sorcerers created a huge holographic projection and projected Old Qin's image onto the bow of the Alliance's ships. On the way here he asked Old Qin for the Panda Man's emblem. In just an hour, a bunch of temporary letterpress emblems were tied to every Alliance commando. They were tied to their arms and pauldrons to ensure that the Pandaren could see them from all angles. Old Qin even taught them Pandaren language. There was only one sentence: Old Qin asked us to help. The Pandaren on the Lost Island were overjoyed. Xinjianzi's back, the Lost Island, was a medium-sized island. In reality, the oval back of this ancient giant tortoise was about 4 kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide. There were only a few thousand Pandaren living on it. Although many of the Pandaren monks were quite powerful, they were still powerless against more than 2,000 fully armed tribal elites who had fallen from nearly 10 airships. Before the airship could completely descend, Old Qin had already descended from the sky from a height of 50 meters. Before he landed, he leaped and swung his huge stick. Using the terrifying power of gravity to accelerate, he swung it diagonally and swept it horizontally. Bang! 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 A total of 7 or 8 orc warriors, their burly bodies weighing more than 400 kilograms, were all swept away by Old Qin. Phew! Old Qin exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Through the gap of his round hat that was missing a corner, his cold and angry eyes were revealed. He immediately spat out a mouthful of liquor, and the high alcohol content of Drunken Cloud turned into a fire breath spell when it came into contact with the flames. The 2 howling orc centurions who were charging at him turned into 2 human-shaped torches. Old Qin, tell everyone that the humans in golden armor are my helpers. Got it. Old Qin, who was dressed as a gardener, immediately understood. In the midst of the battle, a burst of shouts spread out. In the sky, the Alliance's airships did not fire their cannons. This distance was not suitable for parachuting, as it was too slow. Hundreds of ropes hung down from each airship. The Alliance Special Forces, who had been trained in high-altitude rope rapid descent, descended from the sky in armor. As soon as they landed, they directly fought with the orcs. Even if they were accidentally attacked by the Pandaren, they just grinned and said in unfamiliar Pandaren language, Old Qin, found me. The entrance of the Alliance soldiers quickly eased the battle situation. More importantly, with the actions of the Alliance commandos, countless bubbles began to float on the surface of the sea. Thousands of murlocs swam over. These noisy murlocs, under the leadership of Naga, began to climb to the edge of Xinjianzi's turtle shell and threw the ropes over. The female Naga siren priest directly froze these ropes. 1, 2, 3. Pull. The murlocs worked hard and the Naga shouted. The Pandaren on the entire Lost Island could clearly feel that the Lost Island, which had begun to move in the direction of the Great Whirlpool, seemed to be breaking away from the suction of the Great Whirlpool. Occasionally, the Pandaren who were free ran to the shore and were surprised to see tens of thousands of murlocs trying to pull the lost island in the opposite direction. Not only the murlocs but in the direction of the great whirlpool, a huge fish-shaped monster floated to the surface. It pressed its forehead hard against the lost island, and a huge tail slapped the water hard trying to pull the lost island out. In addition to it, more water elements emerged from the bottom of the sea. They raised their thick arms and pushed the island hard. The battle on the Lost Islands was still ongoing. Half an hour later, the Alliance fleet arrived. Hundreds of airships threw down ropes, secured the island with the help of the Naga, and then pulled the island out of the great whirlpool at full power. An hour later, even Naxxramas arrived. This behemoth, which was no smaller than the Lost Island, played a vital role. Hundreds of thousands of energy beams swung down from Naxxramas and grabbed the edge of the Lost Island by itself. It took half an hour to drag and pull the unconscious Xianxia out of the dangerous waters. At this time, the battle on the island was over. More than 2,000 orc warriors were wiped out. Every corner of the island rang with the cheers of the Pandaren. Long live the Alliance. Chapter 1940. This was definitely an accident. Duque dared to swear that there was absolutely no such scene in the original history. He couldn't imagine how brainless the tribal warriors were to start a massacre as soon as they landed. This made something that could be said to be far-sighted happen. The Pandaren spontaneously praised the Alliance. Because not only did the Alliance send people to save their people according to Old Chen's request, but the Alliance also did the heroic deed of saving Xianxia. It was a miracle to drag an ancient giant tortoise that weighed 10,000 tons. The Pandaren of the Lost Island held a grand welcome ceremony for the arrival of the Alliance. There were red lanterns, firecrackers, couplets, and even lion and dragon dances everywhere. This made Duque, who had secretly come to the Lost Island, think that he had returned to the countryside of the Celestial Empire. That kind of ink painting of the countryside made Duque feel very comfortable. What surprised Duque the most was that the leaders of the Earth and Water faction and the Firegold faction, the two Pandaren sects that came from different eras, Aisha Cloudwalker and G Firepalm, both of them wanted to join the Alliance at the same time. That's right. They wanted to join the Alliance. Duque clearly remembered that Ji Huazhong of the Huazhong sect had directly joined the Horde in history. Why did they join the Alliance? Would there still be Pandaren in the Horde? With a shudder, Duque immediately came to a realization. No wonder the Huazhong sect made this choice. First, it was the Horde who attacked the Lost Island, and no matter how you looked at it, the Horde was evil and the Alliance was simply the messenger of justice. Second, the Alliance looked more powerful. At first glance, it was obvious that the Alliance's warships were far superior to the Horde's level. The Alliance's Naxxramas and the Marine Race Army were completely showing their muscles. If they still foolishly joined the Horde at this time, then what about the tribal warriors who were killed? Wasn't this what a certain transmigrator often heard in the Celestial Empire? 49 years to join Old Jiang. For fighters like the Pandaren, Duque would definitely accept them. The profession of warrior monks, even if it became a little awkward in the later stages, their strength was neither strong nor weak, and their development prospects overlapped with other melee professions. But this was war, and the professions played the role of elites in war. They were not simply ordinary soldiers who were regarded as consumables by many generals, and there were no rigid requirements for logistics. Upon entering the elite level, the diversification of development would cause the enemy to be at a loss as to what to do. Speaking of which, how many people know that pandas are actually ferocious beasts? Soon, another piece of information attracted Duque's attention. After returning to Naxxramas and carefully examining the corpses of the Horde warriors, Chen said with certainty, "These orc warriors have a murderous aura." A baleful aura? Duque's system elf had indeed analyzed the aura of Yashaji, but Duque was surprised that Old Chen, a Pandaren who had never seen Yashaji before, was so sure. Not only Old Chen but even the big sister of the Earth and Water faction Aisha, and the big shot of the Firegold faction Ji Huazhong, came to the same conclusion. This must be an evil orc who had been instructed by Yashaji to head to Pandaria in order to resurrect Yashaji. This conclusion made the Alliance elders nervous. If it was just to beat up the Horde, the Alliance wouldn't care no matter how many Horde warriors there were. If the ancient gods were involved, then it would be a different matter. The two ancient gods who had already appeared could be said to be more formidable than the other. See, Thun had merely let the Kiraj insectoids wreak havoc on half of the Kalimdor continent. Yaxaron had controlled the entire Otter, and had almost controlled the 4 guardians Garakan. A total of 5 guardians had been controlled. The alliance had cooperated with the guardians many times and was well aware of their strength. At the level of the guardians, conventional weapons were completely ineffective. Cannonballs were just explosive reactions of the fire element to the guardians, plus flying items that were slightly faster. The high-level laws on the guardians directly ignored them. It was this kind of guardian that was tricked by a stupid dragon into 5. Since they were destined to be enemies, Duque also pretended to ask Tyrant and then went to ask Tarim, the king of thunder and lightning, as well as Mimiron, to get a large number of books and records about the ancient gods. Tyrant had mainly obtained Elun's records. Tarim got first-hand information about the Guardians' battles. Everyone knew how huge Yashaji's body was and how terrifying its influence was. Hearing about the murderous aura, the most sensitive nerves in the hearts of the Alliance and Pandaren were touched. Under the discussion of the Pandaren and the big bosses of the Alliance, they quickly put the blame on the Horde. At first, Duque thought that this was slander because in history Braindead Roar didn't become the public enemy of Azeroth so quickly because of the murderous aura. Later on, Duque realized that he didn't even think of it. What was this about putting the blame on? Braindead Roar was really full of shit. What happened next was mostly in the direction of history. For example, the Zandala trolls who had stood on the side of the Alliance when the Alliance attacked Zhou Xian. William allowed the more rational faction of the trolls to continue to stay on their island in Stranglethorn Vale, acknowledging that it was the territory of the Zandala trolls. But the situation changed. After seeing the Alliance destroy Zwaman and Zhou Xian, the Zandala trolls had a different view of the Alliance. Some of the trolls believed that the Alliance would attack them sooner or later. In this situation, long before the Cataclysm, the prophet, Zul, predicted that Zandala Island would be destroyed by the Cataclysm led by the Wing of Death, but the king of Zandala turned a deaf ear. When Zandala Island was destroyed, the king of Zandala was powerless to stop it. This time, Zandala was determined to go all out for the continuation of the trolls. After a long period of obscurity, this time, Zandala put himself in a leadership position to lead all the trolls and fight for their survival. In any case, the wise men of Zandala were completely convinced by Zul at this moment. They believed that only war could prevent the extinction of the ancient race of trolls that had existed in this world since the creation of Azeroth. Most of the troll tribes were unified under the banner of Zandala rebuilding the glory of the Troll Empire, including the defeated forest trolls of Zwaman and the Gurubashi forest trolls that had split into countless scattered tribes all over Stranglethorn Vale. Stranglethorn Vale was very large and had a lot of caves. Even when the Alliance occupied the entire Stranglethorn Vale, there were still a large number of trolls hiding in the caves, struggling at death's door. It was under Zul's call that these trolls all rushed out and attacked many of the Alliance's civilian ports. They used old-fashioned wooden warships to form a large but not powerful fleet, preventing the destruction of Zandala. And Duque took advantage of this. Chapter 1941. The alliance in Azeroth had long been modified by Duque to the point where it was almost unrecognizable. Before the Cataclysm, the alliance had a strict radar warning system. Especially on the west coast of the Eastern Kingdom, where humans and dwarves were the majority, there was a radar station every 100 kilometers. Each radar station was stationed with at least one company of soldiers with 3 griffins or hippogriffs. There were also coastal patrols 3 times a day. If the Alliance could discover the Horde's flying fleet, how could they not discover the Zandala trolls? William had suggested to Duque if they should strike first. Duque shrugged. Why should we stop them from leaving the Eastern Kingdom? Is it because there are too many soldiers in Stormwind and they like to play with trolls all over Stranglethorn Vale? If they leave, there will be one less problem. When the time comes, we will have an excuse to intervene in Pandaria. Stranglethorn Vale was thousands of kilometers from north to south. Even the Kiraji bugmen were a huge problem. It was impossible to kill all the trolls in the underground space that was similar to stalactites. Now that they had come out to die, it couldn't be better. Sure enough, Duque's personal thief Edwin Van Cleef quickly sent back news that Zandala's boss, Zul, had decided to ally with Zandala's ancient ally, the Ancient Devils. Thus, Zandala was on the opposite side of the alliance for the first time. The Ancient Devils gathered under the leadership of the weapons master, Fian, and planned to take advantage of the chaos to regain control of Pandaria. At this time, the main force of Pandaria transported by the Horde's airship began to set up military camps in the south of Jade Forest, forcing the local Pandaren to work in preparation for the war. Gurus used violence to enslave the Pandaren of Sweet Dew Village and began a massacre, wiping out the Pandaren of Morning Breeze Village. Taking advantage of the conflict between the macaques and the goldfish people, they joined forces with the macaques to attack the Pearl Fin goldfish people's territory. They didn't expect the alliance to make a move first. The silly macaques ran to Pearl Fin village and were ambushed by the goldfish people and Naga. But the war also caused the influence of Fiend to appear. The Pandaran's boss, Zhou Xian, personally tried to stop the war but to no avail. At this time, a Dragonmaw clan beastman who had been liberated by Sal from the shelter Kirk, was on his way to Pandaria when his spaceship crashed on the coast of the Jadeite forest. The spacecraft crashed into an auspicious dragon in the clouds. The mother dragon died to protect the young dragon and entrusted the young dragon to Kirk. One man and one dragon struggled to survive on the coast of Pandaria. Kirk decided to hand the dragon over to the Cloud Dragon Knights. However, Pandaman Elder only urged him to stay and asked him to raise this young dragon. He agreed and decided to let the Flying Dragon tribe listen to her and become a real dragon-throat orc. However, his philosophy conflicted with the Pandaren of the Knights. Due to his injuries, the training did not go well. Later, the Horde's General Nazgûl personally led the Horde's army to attack the Pearl Fin's village. This time he was almost dragged into the water by Vasht's subordinate, the Deepwater Lord Caratheras, to teach him how to reincarnate as a murloc. The tribe suffered a great loss and nearly 5,000 orc warriors died. However, this intense battle had freed all the baleful auras from their seals. During this period, the Pandaman wanderer Zhou Xian came into contact with the Horde. He was still searching for the ancient prophecy, but he could not prevent the outbreak of war and the release of the baleful auras. The baleful aura of doubt raided the Green Dragon Temple, corrupting and slaughtering a large number of Pandaman monks. The baleful aura of despair occupied the Vermilion Bird Temple. The baleful aura of fear broke the seal and escaped from the cave where the Mantis people were hiding and invaded the palace of the Mantis People Empire. The great Empress Shakhil and her subjects were controlled, and the Centennial Reincarnation War broke out 10 years earlier. The Mantis army attacked the Great Wall, and the Bison were forced to break through the Black Bull Pass and escape into the pass. The baleful aura of anger escaped from the Shadowpan Monastery and took control of the Bison who had lost their homes. The cavalry army burned and plundered the Pandaman village in Kunlai Mountain, causing heavy casualties among the people. The baleful aura of violence and hatred started a war in the Shadowpan Monastery, and the main force of the Shadow Trace sect suffered heavy casualties. At this time, Old Qin had already entered Pandaria with some of the elites of the Lost Island. He was lobbying various forces to accept the alliance. Duque promised Old Qin that after more than half of the Pandamen in Pandaria agreed to let the alliance enter Pandaria, the alliance's fleet would enter this continent and destroy those evil races and existences. Naxxramas and the alliance's fleet were hovering over the sea 30 kilometers northeast of the giant beast island in the north of Pandaria, which happened to be a position that all Pandarians could not see with their eyes. More alliance fleets were gathering at sea and began to gather on the open sea between Stormport and New Kultira's port. As the two large fleets were too large to be accommodated by the port, they could only anchor near the coast and wait for instructions from the alliance's military headquarters. Duque continued to drink tea in the secret room of Naxxramas. Well, this tea from the Lost Island is really good. This is the legendary Longjing before the Ming dynasty. Duque made tea for Jaina with familiarity. Jaina blinked her beautiful eyes. Hey! Duke, don't tell me you've been to the Lost Islands before? You're so familiar with it. Hee hee. How is that possible? The Pandamen on the Lost Island said that they had not seen any intelligent creatures other than Pandamen in the last 10,000 years. Duque laughed. He almost accidentally exposed his identity as a celestial. Forget it. As your wife, I have an obligation to keep your secret. But if you don't say it, I won't ask. You have too many secrets. Jaina rolled her eyes at Duque. Is it okay for the alliance to just wait like this? Our daily consumption of food and fuel is skyrocketing. Duque shrugged. That's why I didn't mobilize everyone. Jaina was speechless. Although the alliance was aggressive and had encircled the Horde on all fronts in Kalimdor, It was actually not an all-out war. Most of the officers and soldiers reported and stayed in the military camps of the various countries, stepping up their training and preparing to attack at any time. In fact, there was really no need for the millions of soldiers, reserves and militia. The active army at the front line was only 100,000 infantry and less than 1,000 airships. In total, there were only 300,000 people. In addition, there were the Karakis, which were free troops. The cost of fuel was very low because it was mainly needed by the army. The airships used elemental energy sent over by the magic net, which also didn't need money. The real headache was the food and drink of these troops, as well as the artillery ammunition that was about to expire. Compared to the enthusiastic donations of the Alliance, it was like a drizzle. Duque pointed at the crisscrossed map of power on Pandaria. I'm dragging this out to make some space in Pandaria. Pandaria is too crowded now. Chapter 1942. A chess player's basic skill was to watch at least 3 moves before taking a step. Good chess players could even see the next 10 moves of their opponent. Others who met Pandaria might say, wow, it's a whole new continent. Can we colonize it? Is there a new territory? Duque was thinking about how to fight the Burning Legion if they came. At present, the Alliance had completed or basically completed their military deployment in the Eastern Kingdom, Kalimdor and Northrend. When the Legion was ready, they would be snowballed by the demons if they weren't careful when facing the Burning Legion's spaceships dropping from the sky. They did not care about the spaceship that had just landed. In a while, the Eridar warlocks would directly open the teleportation door and send more void distortion demons over. More Eridar warlocks arrived and they immediately opened more teleportation gates. 1 hour they might only have to face hundreds of demons. If they didn't do anything for a day, the number might soar to 10,000. Anyway, there were billions of demons in the twisting nether. They would resurrect after being killed and run back to their corpses. The only thing stopping the demons from invading was the size of the portals, which was the number of troops sent out per unit of time. The Azeroth in reality wasn't as small as it was in the game. In the Elven Forest in the game, it would take 10 minutes at most to run from the westernmost to the easternmost on a horse. In reality, the Elven Forest was about 100 kilometers from north to south and 300 kilometers from east to west. It was also a forest with complicated terrain. People and horses had to be changed and it would take a whole day to send a message. With such a vast area, if they were still as backward as in history, they could only rely on griffins to find it. Most of the troops had to rely on the 4 legs of horses to run. By the time they arrived, it would be too late. If Duque was given another 10 years, Duque was confident that the 3 continents would be able to hold on. At least they wouldn't collapse. When they reached Pandaria, there wouldn't be any empty space without a major operation. Of course, Duque knew that the devilish ancients, mantismen and Zandala trolls weren't good people. The Alliance couldn't just start a massacre, right? Anyway, they were strong and had a lot of capital. The Alliance just quietly pretended to be cool and waited for the Horde and the evil races on Pandaria to die. In the following days, all kinds of information continued to come. Just like in history, Zandala successfully revived the first emperor of the ancient devils, the Thunder God, on the Island of Reckoning. The Zandala army was still overcast. They had found the ancient Devil Mountain's treasury and wanted to steal the powerful treasures inside. In the end, most of the Shadowpan Monastery fell into the hands of the evil. Even the sect master Zhu Xian was controlled by the evil of hatred. Only Master Xuelio and his disciples managed to restrain the threat of the evil of violence. Because the Alliance had Old Qin take action, and with the help of Lena Lightspear and the other second-rate experts of the Alliance, the Shadow Trace sect was able to purge the Fiend's influence from the outside in. Zhu Talon was also freed from the Fiend's control. After a short rest, Zhu Talon finally realized that the situation in Pandaria was completely out of control. The Shadow Trace sect was an organization founded 10,000 years ago by the last emperor, Xiao Hao, who had gathered a group of top-notch experts. They wandered in the shadow of Pandaria, fulfilling their mission of guarding the fiends. As the current leader of the Shadow Trace faction, Zhu Talon carried a heavy burden on his shoulders. He commanded all the warriors of the Shadow Trace faction and fought together with them to protect Pandaria from the invasion of outsiders. In a sense, he was the biggest obstacle in the Alliance's control of Pandaria. After all, in the eyes of the Pandaren, be it the Alliance or the Horde, they were all outsiders. Entering Pandaria without permission was the greatest provocation to the entire Pandaren race. It was a declaration of war. But the appearance of Old Qin and a group of Alliance elites made Zhu Tilan see something different. Old Qin, is the Alliance you speak of really so scrupulously abiding by the rules that they won't step into Pandaria without the consent of more than half of the Pandaren leaders? Old Qin chewed on the bamboo in his mouth and repeated what happened on the Lost Island. First of all, I have to admit that this interracial organization called the Alliance is 10,000 times stronger than we imagined. Secondly, they are the enemies of the orcs who slaughtered in the Jadeite forest. I heard that the evil orcs provoked a war against the Alliance. Since they couldn't beat the Alliance, they were most likely tempted by Xianxia and came to Pandaria to seek Xianxia's power. The most important thing is that the Alliance and the ancient gods are mortal enemies. They have already killed 2 ancient gods. I've seen the remains of the ancient gods with my own eyes, and I've felt the evil that hasn't faded from the Holy Light Seal. Moreover, the Alliance respects us Pandaren very much because we guard Xianxia's remaining Sha. I think we're on the same page as the Alliance. Also, including their commander, Duke Marcus, the Alliance has many demigods. Zhu Tilan was tempted. It was true that the Shadow Trace faction was the strongest evil suppression organization. At the same time, the Shadow Trace faction was also proud. They had been around for 10,000 years, waiting for the day when Xianxia came out. If not for this experience where even their leader was tricked, the Shadow Trace faction probably wouldn't let outsiders intervene, let alone an alliance dominated by humans. They were completely outsiders. Xianxia's spirit was terrifying. They had personally experienced it. The organizations suppressing Sha all over Pandaria began to collapse, and the main force of the Shadow Trace faction also suffered heavy losses. In such a situation, no matter how stubborn Zhu Tilan was, he realized that the Shadow Trace faction alone, or even the entire Pandaren, couldn't suppress Sha and cause trouble all over the continent. When the Zandala trolls, Demonkin ancients, Mantis men and the Horde joined forces, it might be the end of the Pandaren. The Pandaren were more homebodies, not eccentric and peace-loving, but they weren't stupid. They wouldn't sit still and wait for death. It was rare that such a powerful alliance was so polite and principled. It was really to the liking of the Pandaren, who regarded themselves as a race of etiquette. Thinking of this, Zhu Tilan made a decision. Old Qin, please introduce me to Marcus, the leader of the alliance you mentioned. I want to verify with my own eyes whether he and his alliance will help the Pandaren's future. No problem. Their people are here. They have a special way to contact us. Old Qin immediately found Lena Thunderspear. Lena immediately raised her wrist and pressed her right hand on the bracer with a special gesture. Silverhand 10086 calling 9527. Please answer if you copy. A second later, a crisp female voice came from the bracer. 9527 copy. Please speak. For the Pandaren, who respected tradition and relied on shouting to pass messages, and only rode the soaring dragon in emergencies, instant messaging was simply nonsense. After Lena finished speaking, another voice answered, May I ask if Sect Master Zhu wants a quick meeting or an immediate one? Chapter 1943. This time it wasn't just the voice. An illusory, translucent human female head popped out, giving Zhu Tilan a fright. The other party spoke half-baked Pandaren language. I thought you were a human. Zhu Tilan looked at the short and fat Lena. Sorry. I'm a female dwarf. In the Alliance, humans are the most populous race, Lena said, a little annoyed. Hello, I'm Sally Whitemane, one of the bishops of the Holy Light Church in the Alliance. Sally smiled. Zhu Tilan started talking to the white-haired human girl wearing a red, gold-rimmed hat. What's with fast? So what if it's fast? If it's fast, you can come on a flying mount. We'll have special flying knights to lead the way. It'll take about half a day to get here. Or we can send flying warships. That'll be faster. If it's fast, we'll open a portal here and you'll be able to reach our flying fortress immediately. There were so many proper terms and Zhu Tilan was dumbfounded. Teleportation portal? Do you know magic too? And don't portals only lead to a fixed place in the wild? Almost as soon as he finished speaking, Sally smiled. We can give you a demonstration. Okay. The next second, a portal opened precisely 2 meters in front of Zhu Tilan. Zhu Tilan couldn't help but swallow his saliva when he saw the completely different scenery inside the oval portal with a psychedelic purple-blue halo. On the other side of the portal was a group of smiling human guards who were not armed. Zhou Xian was the leader of the Shadow Trace faction, and his position among the Pandaren was extraordinary. Unfortunately, Pandaren were a very traditional race like the Celestial Empire in the 19th century. For 10,000 years, Pandaren's lifestyle and technology had been almost stagnant. But the Pandaren didn't only have monks. They also had quite a few magic professions such as mages, priests and shamans. The magic civilization of Pandaren wasn't particularly powerful, but they still had portals, just not as exaggerated as the ones in the Alliance. Now the core members of the Alliance such as the elite warriors, would carry a spatial coordinate with them at all times. With the help of the weave, any Radiant Moon wizard could open a teleportation gate from any place the weave could reach. While Dumuk had been rotting outside Pandaria for so many days, the shameless demigod of the weave had already spread his evil claws all over Pandaria, which was the weave nodes. However, Duque was very careful and did not recklessly lay down the weave. Moreover, they were closely monitoring every node. After all, he did not know what was going on with the baleful aura. Legend had it that it was a great killing weapon that could kill a large group of Titan guardians. There was no cure for a morbid life. If Yashaji's baleful aura infected Duque's weave, that would be hilarious. Imagine a large group of Alliance heroes such as Tyrion Fordring kneeling on the ground in an ORZ pose and saying, "I'm a pile of shit, let me shit." Duque would definitely feel that the world was hopeless. Now, a teleportation gate had already subdued Zhou Xian. If Sect Master Zhou doesn't think it's safe, you can always ride a flying mount. Sally slyly tried to provoke Zhou Xian. If it were a man it would be a standard mockery. If it were a woman it would be a proper provocation. Are you afraid? Come if you're not. What are you afraid of? Sure enough, after being provoked, Zhou Xian strode through the teleportation gate with his two deputies and old Chen. As soon as they arrived, they immediately saw a handsome young man waiting at the door. "Hello, I'm the son of Varian Rin, the king of Stormwind City and the deputy commander of the Alliance. My name is Andoin Rin. Please come with me. The commander is already waiting for you, Lord Rin." Little Andoin was not the famous dirty priest, who would shamelessly use a mass resurrection spell in battle. He was now just a novice priest. His innocent smile was very pleasing to the eye, and he easily won Zhou Xian's favor. Little Andoin took Zhou Xian and Old Chen in a small circle, passing through the port of Naxxramas. Zhou Xian was deeply shaken. Although the Alliance now had specialized supply ships to resupply the fleets floating outside Naxxramas, and even developed floating docks for maintenance purposes, the ships of the Alliance would still return to the port regularly. After all, the soldiers could only rest better when they returned to the port. The real overhaul of the ships could only be carried out in the port. Hundreds of battleships were docked in the huge square docks. From time to time, battleships over 200 meters long would enter and leave the port on a designated route. Tens of thousands of people were busy at the port, and from time to time, large trucks would drag large boxes to resupply the battleships. This futuristic scene was definitely beyond Zhou Xian's imagination. It was like the first time the humans in front of the Door of Darkness saw the creation of the Titans. The feeling was indescribable. Is this the supreme force of the Alliance? Zhou Xian's voice was trembling. Not to mention him, even Old Chen, who had come to Naxxramas for the second time, was shocked by this scene. That's not it. Our commander, Duke Marcus, is a demigod of the weave. He rules the 4 elemental realms of Azeroth. He is the elemental lord of the land of fire and the throne of tides. The master of the throne of the wind god is another leader of the Alliance, Sylvanas Windrunner of the elven kingdom of Sindorii. As for the Stonewall continent, Therazane, the mother of Stonewall, has already submitted to Commander Marcus, Little Andoin said seriously. It was his undisguised youthful innocence that shocked people the most when he said these words in a matter-of-fact tone. Zhou Xian wanted to find a flaw in his words, but he was surprised to find that when Little Andoin said these words, the Alliance guards beside him all puffed out their chests with pride. Zhou Xian sucked in a breath of cold air. He was extremely glad that the Alliance was not an enemy, nor had they come with hostility. Compared to the Alliance, the Horde warriors who relied on axes were nothing. Finally, in the secret chamber, Zhou Xian saw the Alliance commander, Duque. "Welcome, welcome." Zhou Xian was stunned. The people who welcomed him all spoke half-baked Pandaren language. Duque was actually fluent in Pandaren. The common language in Pandaria was Pandarian, but the Pandaren had their own way of speaking, which was like an accent. Hearing Duque's pure accent, Zhu Tilan felt a deep sense of respect. Chapter 1944. Not to mention Zhu Tilan, even Zhou Xian's eyes bulged out of their sockets. He was completely stunned. For the panda people, the humans in the world of Azeroth were the standard foreigners. Foreigners speaking half-baked panda language was already a great respect for the panda people. In the human-led alliance, these foreign races were so powerful and they were so respectful to them. That was a great honor. Zhu Tilan was flattered that Duque could speak the panda language so fluently. But could he blame Duque for this? Damn it, Duque did not know what was wrong with this Azeroth. Pandarian was Chinese. And panda language was Mandarin with a Sichuan flavor. In fact, when Duque first heard Zhou Xian and Lily talking, he was dumbfounded. But his experience meant that he was not born with the magical Pandarian language. After all, everyone knew that he was from Stormwind. Duque had been having a hard time holding back these days. He could only propose after meeting Zhou Xian in the alliance that all the higher-ups, or at least the officers who were about to go to Pandaria, had to learn Chinese. Pandarian. Speaking of which, isn't this normal? The panda people's elected leader was Emperor Xiaohao, who died 10,000 years ago. In the eyes of the Chinese, which foreign devil's name would be Xiaohao? Was it the distortion of time and space? Or the loss of moral integrity? Duque did not know. Anyway, he had a reasonable reason to teach the entire alliance to learn Chinese. Duque was very happy. Otherwise, if there was no suitable reason, people would think that Duque was promoting the demon language if he forced the promotion of the Chinese language. It was because of the panda people like Zhou Xian and Lily, who had traveled the Eastern Kingdom's mainland and could speak both human and Pandarian as teachers. And Duque had pointed out the importance of Pandarian, that the alliance had a craze for learning Chinese. Zhu Tilan seemed to think that Duque was just trying to coax him. He didn't think too much about it at first, so he casually complimented him. "You speak the Pandaren language very well, Commander. Thank you for the trouble." Duque replied naturally, "Not at all, not at all." This was courtesy, but courtesy also had a fixed form and one had to pay attention to the tone. If it was used incorrectly, it could cause a misunderstanding or make people laugh to death. For example, a very simple, "thank you." Usually it was polite to say, "thank you," when someone helped you. If the other party killed your entire family and you coldly said, "thank you," that would be sarcasm and it would represent a monstrous hatred. Unwilling to give up, Zhu Tilan exchanged a few more pleasantries. Who would have thought that Du Muk could answer so fluently? Zhu Tilan, Chen and Li Li's eyes widened. Duque pretended to be smart. "What? Are you so surprised that I learned Pandarian? I am the most intelligent mage in the alliance. There are so many races in the alliance. Although everyone learns the common language as the official language as the commander, I know the common language, Dwarven language, Quell, Dorii language, Kaldorii language, Drenii language and even Titan language. I also know Eridar, which we call the demonic language." Oh. It turned out that this intelligent commander of the alliance was also a master of languages. The three Pandarans suddenly came to a realization, and their eyes were filled with admiration. Even as a Chinese, he could be so awesome in a different world. There was no one else like him. Du Muk laughed sinisterly in his heart. "Sorry. Apart from the so-called Pandaren language, all my languages come with translation software." The discussion between the two sides suddenly became very friendly. Zhu first said that he hoped that the Pandaran's territorial sovereignty would not be violated by the alliance, and that their race and customs would be respected. Duque immediately said that the alliance respected the territorial integrity and racial status of every member country and independent race. The alliance was willing to invite the Pandaren into the pit as a member country, not as a vassal race or organization. To join the alliance. Zhu also said that he hoped the alliance would swear in the form of an oath that they would not kill neutral forces and races at will. Duque immediately said that the alliance agreed. The alliance would not kill the innocent. Look, the bugmen who used to hang out with Si Thun were now the alliance's underlings. Only the stubborn races and believers who firmly supported the evil gods would be eliminated by the alliance. In fact, up to this point Zhu was already very satisfied. Finally, he vaguely asked what the alliance thought of the Mantis Men, the Ancient Devils and the Wild Oxmen. Duque sighed. I heard that there is a saying in Pandaria that things should not happen more than 3 times. The first time the Alliance can consider it a mistake. As long as it does not cause major losses to the Alliance can tolerate mistakes, but the Alliance will be extremely vigilant. The second time the Alliance will punish them severely no matter what. There is a third time. Duque didn't say anything and directly made a chopping gesture with his hand. Don't underestimate this gesture. If an ordinary person made this gesture, it would at most be a threat. However, Duque made this gesture as the strongest demigod and the commander of the Alliance, which meant that no matter how many people there were or what the status of the other party was, he would kill them all. However, this approach was in line with the Pandaren way of moderation. Don't cause trouble, don't be afraid of trouble. Equality, universal love, and responsibility. Zhou Xian felt that he had made the right decision this time. On the basis of equality and mutual benefit, Zhou Xian and Duque discussed and signed a series of letters of intent. Of course, this would only be officially signed after Zhou Xian helped to persuade the other Pandaren organizations and obtain the agreement of half of them. On the other hand, under Duque's clever guidance, Zhou Xian also agreed not to interfere with the Alliance's fight against the Zandalar trolls. In fact, the grudge between the Alliance and the trolls was a bad one. Because when the High Elves came east and arrived at the Long Song Forest, they actually seized the territory of the Amani trolls. If they insisted on this point, the Alliance would be the one in the wrong. Duque used diplomatic language to point out that the Night Elves used to be the trolls. The atmosphere suddenly changed and it suddenly became a civil war. Given the Pandaren's character, they definitely didn't want to get involved. The key was that Duque pointed out that when Ragnaros and the ancient gods were stirring up trouble, the trolls took the opportunity to stab them in the back. Zhou Xian didn't like these trolls at that time. The Zandalar trolls had now recruited the Amani and Gurubashi trolls, but these trolls used to believe in evil gods. The Amani loved torturing and killing animals, imprisoning the souls of animals that were close to demigod level and integrating them into their bodies to gain power. The Gurubashi worshipped the evil god Hacker and loved blood sacrifices. Moreover, the Zandalar had become a traitor. First, it helped the Alliance deal with Hacker and now it actually betrayed them. It gathered the trolls, attacked human ports, killed people, robbed human ships and ran away. This was a classic case of betraying one's own people and then using the enemy's hand to annex the other races. In turn, it turned around and abandoned its former ally. Chapter 1945. The Zandalas had their own reasons for doing all this. At first, it was because Gurubashi and his bastard compatriots had gone too far. Later, they did rise up because they were afraid of the Alliance's persecution. But after Duque revealed so many facts, he inadvertently induced Zhou Xian's thoughts. Duque was not afraid that Zhou Xian would send people to investigate because what Duque said was the truth. Of course, some things. Grass grows 3 feet high on Zujin's grave, and Zwaman has become a magic testing ground for blood elf mages. Would I say such things? Zul Gurub has now become a heavy industrial base in Stormwind. The gold mine in Stranglethorn Vale has been exploited by the Marcus family and used as a gold reserve for Duque's little treasury. A certain black dragon has also slept there and become a warehouse manager. The iron ore has been mined and smelted on the spot. It's a one-stop operation to produce flying warships, tanks, and armored vehicles. Such a trivial matter was not even worth mentioning. Who the hell told you to believe in evil and stab us in the back? You deserve to be confiscated. There was nothing wrong with this logic. As a leader-level figure who paid attention to his own race, Zhou Xian was undoubtedly qualified. Unfortunately, his lack of knowledge led to a lack of breadth of thinking. Besides, he could not care less about races other than Pandaren. Just like that, Zhou Xian and Old Chen left happily. They would contact the various Pandaren organizations next. Of course, this would definitely take time. This allowed Duque's overt plot to continue. Because the Horde's elites led by Brainless Roar were still attacking Pandaria like a raging fire. The more ferocious the Horde's attacks, the faster the Pandaren's integration. In the original history, both the Alliance and the Horde were looking for a powerful force to win the war. In the Splendid Valley, despite the objections of others, Gurs firmly believed that the Horde should use the power of Sha to deal with the Alliance. After a discussion among the leaders of the Alliance, they decided not to use the power of Sha. In this life it was not so troublesome. Only the Horde led by Brainless Roar was panicking. The Alliance? Now the Alliance was a righteous organization that had successively defeated 2 ancient gods, destroyed the Scourge army and fought against the Armageddon army. They had double-digit demigods, thousands of flying warships, tens of thousands of ships on the sea, hundreds of thousands of tanks, armored vehicles and all kinds of cannons, as well as millions of conventional forces. With this level of strength, would he still need to take the unorthodox path? Great Chieftain Garush gave the order to search for a powerful ancient devil race divine artifact, the Sacred Bell. In Kunlai Peak, it was supposed to be an exciting showdown between scheming and counter-scheming. This time, under Duque's signal, the alliance did not interfere, and as a result the tribe succeeded easily. It was just that Dumuk had pretended to send an elite team led by Brigida Bendis to help an ancient hero in the name of resisting the power of the Holy Bell, the Monkey King of the Macaques from 10,000 years ago. Brigid passed the Monkey King's trial and obtained the Hammer of Harmony. It was created by the Pandaren and could resist the power of the Holy Bell. Garush led the elites to the ancient Devil Mountain Terrace in Kunlai Mountain, preparing to use the Holy Bell to allow the tribal warriors to control the power of the fiends. In the end, they were stopped by the Van Cleef father and daughter and the Alliance agents. Before this, Vanessa had asked Duque, "Why are you acting like this when you clearly want to see Brainless Howl cause trouble and can't wait for him to become Yashaji's biological son?" This was Duke's reply, "Alas, it would be too fake if the Alliance did nothing. Politics is so hypocritical. Just treat it as striking a monk for a day." "Oh no, you're wrong. Just treat it as striking a monk for a day." Duque's words were very zen-like the Pandaren, but because of his ignorance, Vanessa laughed. "All right, my dear master, I will obey your orders. But you owe me a favor, okay? Aren't you my maid? What do you mean by asking for favors when you work for master?" Duque pretended to be angry. "Hehe. Since I've served you for so many years, just promise me. When we're done with the Burning Legion, I'll make another small request." Okay." Duque scratched his head. Unknowingly, Vanessa had also served him as a maid for 30 years. If not for the eternal blessing, she would have given him all her youth. From this point it seemed like he really owed her a little. Duque did not think too much and casually agreed. There was no doubt about the skills of the Van Cleef father and daughter. They succeeded. The enraged Gurus destroyed the Holy Bell. It turned out that in history the Holy Bell had smashed little Anduin to the brink of death. But in this life, there was no place for little Anduin to appear. There was no other way. Duque could not possibly let little Anduin go knowing that something would happen, right? Speaking of which, William had the intention to groom his son. Hence, under Duque's instigation, little Anduin followed Old Chin everywhere. Of course, Duque arranged for Khadgar to monitor the whole process. In addition, Old Wa sent out his rumored harem and real teammate Valera. After greeting Old Chin, she stealthily followed Old Chin. It could be considered as training for little Anduin. Duque did not think much of it. After all, in Duque's opinion, if the Alliance really handed over the baton to little Anduin, the dirty priest who played mass resurrection on the battlefield, the world would definitely be at peace. On the other hand, the first emperor of the ancient demons, the god of thunder, had returned to his former palace, Thunder King Island. He gathered the scattered ancient demons' tribes and planned to reunite the chaotic and divided Pandaria. The huge fleet of the Zandala trolls had tamed many powerful primitive beasts on Giant Beast Island, which was originally part of the South Sea, and landed on Thunder God Island. The Zandala trolls had also brought their allies, the elite and powerful priests and rulers of the forests, jungles, deserts and frost trolls, to help the god of thunder conquer Pandaria. In addition, the Zandala trolls had also invaded the various coastlines of Pandaria. They went to the northern island of Pandaria, Giant Beast Island, originally part of the South Sea, and tamed the powerful wild beasts there to fight for them. After learning about the rise of the god of thunder and the Zandala trolls, Zhu Talon hesitated for a long time. Little Anduin, who was listening at the side, was a little puzzled. "Actually, why don't we let the Alliance enter Pandaria? Many things would be easily solved." "That's right. In the face of absolute power, tricks were meaningless." Zhu Talon had a different opinion. He said to little Anduin, "Child, you can think about it. Your uncle Marcus has extraordinary power. Why doesn't he just flatten the whole of Pandaria? He has the ability to do so." The little prince fell into deep thought. After a while, Zhu Talon said, "This is justice. If you're right, you can go anywhere. If you're not, you can't go anywhere. Relationships that are maintained purely through violence are destined to not last long. Chapter 1946. In Naxxramas, in the secret room that could monitor little Andoin's condition, Xianxia, who was in human form, made a threatening gesture after seeing this scene. She yelled indignantly. Taking the side of reason? Bullshit. Our Duque doesn't need to reason with the enemy. He'll just kill you as soon as he shows up. He won't stop until the enemy is dead. That's how Duque treated me back then. He never reasoned with me before he killed me. He turned around and added, "Am I right?" Duque rolled his eyes. "Silly dragon, please watch your words. If I stood in front of you as Immortal, are you sure you wouldn't eat me?" "I won't." Xianxia was absolutely certain. Why? Duque was curious. "You're too skinny. You'll get stuck in my teeth." The black dragon pretended to be deep in thought. "I'll probably slap you to death." Duque was a little angry. He slapped the dragon's butt. "You're asking for a beating, aren't you?" Almost at the moment of being hit, Xianxia subconsciously stuck out her dragon butt. Only then did she realize that Duke wasn't trying to tame a dragon. This was a little awkward. It had become a habit. Xianxia wanted to lower her back down, but found that the dragon taming whip was quickly pressed against the dragon's cave. "Since it's like this, let's just do it." Duque put his hands on the dragon's waist. There was a small twist in history. It was supposed to be Zhou Xian who formed the Shadow Raid Battalion and led the elites to Thunder God Island. Although there weren't many of them, they hid in the dark and successfully thwarted the Thunder God's plan. The biggest variable was William's attack on little Andoin. Perhaps Zhou Xian was moved by little Andoin's sincerity, or perhaps Zhou Xian had a mysterious confidence in the skills of his elite team. Zhou Xian actually let a holy priest sneak around. Even the term pig-like teammate was not enough to describe little Andoin in this state. He was like a lighthouse in the dark. Not only did he emit light and heat, but he could also be easily spotted from a few kilometers away. First, the Shadow Raid camp had been discovered. Then another piece of news forced Zhou Xian to withdraw the rest of his men. The main force of the Shadow Trace sect was gone, but at this moment, the army of the tribe seemed to have received some news and actually charged straight towards the Xianxia Valley. No one knew better than Zhou Xian what was in the splendid valley. As the suzerain of the Shadows Talk faction and the guardian of Pandaria, Zhou Xian made a risky and somewhat idiotic decision. He asked the alliance to take care of Thor while he gathered all the Pandaren who could fight and went to the splendid valley to stop the horde's advance. When the alliance received the news, many alliance generals didn't understand. Only a portion of them kept silent. Are those Pandaren stupid? They know that the horde is stronger and they might not be able to stop them with just their own people. Why didn't they ask the alliance to join in? Xianxia, whose face was flushed after being tamed, said with her hands on her hips. Duke shrugged. Let's put it in a way that you can understand. Let's say that you know that someone is going to raid your old home in Dustwallow Swamp. You know that the other party is probably as strong as your dead father, and that there's a very strong external aid that you don't have much contact with. Would you trust yourself or would you look for external aid? The Black Dragon Princess brain was stuck. Perhaps it was stupid, but it was not difficult to understand. However, since Zhou Xian had made such a decision, the alliance, which had a policy of not interfering with the internal affairs of the Pandaren, was happy to comply. On the other hand, the Pandaren had officially made a diplomatic request, hoping that the alliance would help to destroy the Thunder God on Thunder God Island. What made Duque the most was that this request was not just the will of Zhou Xian or the Shadows Talk Monastery. Now the leaders of the Pandaren temples had a joint request. The White Tiger Temple, the Green Dragon Temple, the Five Dawn Temple, the Red Crane Temple, the Thunder Palm Pavilion. There were no less than 10 Pandaren organizations, big and small. Although not all of them, considering the sacred status of the Pandaren temples in the hearts of the Pandaren, this was already an important consensus reached by Zhou Xian and the Pandaren in a short period of time. Duque raised his eyelids, looked at the main reports and said to Bulang Bronzebeard, "Clean up Thunder God Island." Clean up? Will it? After working together for almost 30 years, Bulang naturally understood what Duque meant. It's okay. Our enemies will soon give us divine assistance. Duque simply closed his eyes. It turned out that in history, with the help of the Shadows Talk faction, the Alliance and the Horde landed on Thunder God Island from two directions. After establishing their respective forward bases, the Alliance and the Horde broke through the walls of the Thunder Throne, raided Zandala's dock and the ancient Devil's Mine, and finally broke through the solid gate of the Thunder Throne. In the process, both the Alliance and the Horde paid a terrible price in human lives. At that time, when the Alliance and the Horde were fighting, their long-range weapons not only hit the Thunder God's people, the Zandala trolls, but also each other. They were practically surrounded by enemies on all sides. What was even more disgusting was that the wretched swamp was right in the middle of Thunder God Island. This disgusting terrain forced both sides to give up on heavy equipment and even mounts, and only relied on the most primitive infantry to fight. The terrible loss of human lives in the process of battle disgusted the commanders of both sides. In the end, the Alliance and the Horde had no choice but to reach a temporary settlement at the gate of the Thunder Throne under the persuasion of Zhou Xian. Even after William returned to Stormwind City, he was shocked by the astronomical amount of compensation. Duque had no intention of sacrificing the precious lives of the Alliance soldiers. He decided to directly resurrect them and feel good about himself, thinking that he was the world's first Thunder God, and that he was going to have a fiery party. At that moment, because the Shadow Raid camp had been discovered and alerted the enemy, both the Zandala trolls and the Ancient Devil were on high alert. However, the same thing was reflected in thousands of pairs of eyes. Tens of thousands of cannonballs whistled through the air and arrived in the blink of an eye from the distant horizon. Most of these primitive races had never seen cannonballs before, and the dazzling rain of cannonballs poured down directly in front of them. Boom, 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 boom. Along with the continuous loud noises, the seemingly never-ending flashes of explosions spread from west to east along the central axis of the entire island to the other side. Countless soil and huge stone slabs that humans couldn't even reach with their arms spread out were lifted from the ground. Countless trolls, ancient devil and deformed monsters created by the thunder gods screamed and tried to dodge the fatal rain of cannonballs, but in the end they were still caught up by the flashes of explosions. Chapter 1947. An unlucky demon ancient warrior was sent flying by the shockwave of the shell explosion. He was thrown dozens of meters away and landed heavily on the ground. In midair, he had already become a matchstick that had been broken into several pieces. It was obvious that he would not survive. The other Zandalar troll's head was sliced in half by a flying tile. The regenerative ability that the trolls were so proud of did not come into play at all. The Zandalar troll was blasted a few meters away and turned into a corpse before it even hit the ground. The southwest part of Thunder God Island, which was lower in altitude, was designed to be a quagmire for the invaders. The Palace of Thunder God, the Throne of Thunder, was located in the northeast. The incompetent invaders, limited by the terrain, had no choice but to launch desperate and futile attacks from the quagmire to the tall city walls. It should have been like this. The unreasonable Alliance cannon array ignored this point and directly used a storm of steel and gunpowder to set off a one-sided massacre on the entire island. Hard granite bricks 2 meters wide, 1 meter high and half a meter thick could not withstand this terrible cannon storm. Even the aftermath of the large caliber cannon was enough to blow all the nearby warriors away. The temple, which had a very classical and rough style, was like the purple-black sky in the sky, groaning in the cannon fire. The thinner buildings were directly uprooted. The violent explosion caused the walls of the palace to easily loosen and collapse. The roof directly disintegrated into countless fragments, like a sand fortress violently smashed by a baseball bat, easily exploding and scattering. There was no creature that could survive a 460mm caliber main cannon. Not the trolls, not the demons, not even the deformed monsters created by Thunder God. These red and black deformed monsters that looked like meatballs wriggling on the ground took a shot from the 203mm cruiser's main cannon. The tentacles that extended from the meatballs seemed to swell up, and then they exploded like meatballs that had been pissed. Instantly, flesh and blood splattered everywhere. The smaller tentacles were directly blown to smithereens, and the thick broken limbs were blown into the sky. After the 460mm main cannon, it was the even more terrifying Gustav-class railway gun. Railway guns of more than 800mm were moved out from the depths of Naxxramas through the railway tracks, revealing their huge muzzles in the direction of the target. It was just a single shot, but it was like a huge hammer smashing a brick. The soil around the entire lightning throne was blasted to pieces. It was like a huge shovel specially used by gods had dug up a huge piece of soil at the edge of the lightning god island, exposing the main structure of the divine hall below to the sky. After 2 rounds of cannon fire, the sand settled down and the Alliance's scanners, radars and optical telescopes were all deployed. The battle situation had changed from an omnidirectional attack to a precise attack. Some of the mutants that did not know what to do had just crawled out of the mud and were hit by the cannons of the Alliance battleships that had been waiting for a long time. For the cannoneers of the Alliance who had long since made arrangements to divide the battlefield, they only needed to move their cannons a few centimeters to fire. A ball of fire struck the mutated monster head-on, and amidst a blood-curdling screech that caused the surrounding space to tremble, the lump of meat completely exploded, turning into blood and minced meat that filled the sky before finally falling down in a swirl. Small-scale bloody rain continued to fall everywhere. The most important thing was that the Thunder Throne, which had once been the pride of the Devil Ancients, had completely disappeared from the Lightning God Island. The terrible cannons covered and flattened the entire island, blowing up every building on the island and turning them into rubble and powder. This was not the end. A huge floating island was descending from the clouds. There were towering round towers of various sizes on the island. The towers were slender, and the decorations on the spherical towers were mainly white with a lot of gorgeous purple and bright red. This was the other mobile air fortress of the Alliance and one of the core kingdoms of the Alliance, the Dalajan. The Dalajan's arrival was completely without warning. If Zhou Xian were here, he would certainly be surprised why it was not Naxxramas, but a magic flying city that he had never seen before. In fact, it was Naxxramas that was 10 kilometers away. It was just the Dalajan that had come. This was not important. A phoenix as hot as the sun appeared. It let out a clear and melodious cry and proudly took the lead from the airport platform on the side of the Dalajan. Beside him were thousands of pure-blooded firehawks that looked like large fireballs, as well as thousands of fire elemental creatures. One by one, the inverted triangular fire elemental creatures descended from the sky and directly broke through the passage of the Thunder Throne. The phoenix flapped its wings and hovered over the Lightning God Island. Its crimson eyes were like a pair of small erupting volcanoes, constantly emitting flames. Its sharp eyes were filled with a kind of pride as the master of all living things, looking disdainfully at the world. It and its master, the demigod Kale, that's Eversong, calmly looked at the island, but it gave others the illusion that these 2 pairs of calm eyes were looking down at their new territory from above. The Lightning God Island was not big, about 3 kilometers long and 1.5 kilometers wide. Not a bad island. It's suitable to be the new base of the Alliance. His mount, the Phoenix Ao, was several times larger than it had been in Draenor. Now its huge body was almost half the size of a town, and the flowing flames under its wings easily brought out clouds of fire with a temperature of at least 3,000 degrees. This terrifying temperature alone was enough to melt gravel into glass. The turbulence set off by the phoenix when it flapped its wings was like the sweat of humans working casually. But after such a spark-like light fell on the Lightning God Island, the entire area was plunged into a sea of fire. The terrifying sea of flames burned and purified everything on the island. This place is too dirty. I'm going to purify it for my master. Kale, that's did not say this publicly, but he did it. For a full half an hour, Kai-Zi ignored the provocative roars coming from the depths of the Lightning Throne and continued to burn the place with flames. When everything was over, Kai-Zi raised his eyelids. What's the hurry? I'll deal with you now. The phoenix descended magnificently. The moment the phoenix landed, a huge portal surrounded by flames opened behind Kai-Zi. 2 fire elemental leaders nearly 10 stories tall walked out from inside. The fire elemental fighter, Smodron, and the fire demon hunter, Sharnox, appeared with 2 molten fire hounds. It was not only them. From the Dalajan, an equally burly figure descended, riding an unbelievably large progenitor dragon. Alder's guardian of thunder, Torim. Following Torim were the 2 guardians of Alkavan, Coralon and Amaron. Of course, because these big guys were too huge, it was easy to ignore them. In fact, the Alliance Marshal Gavin Rad also came down with a few second-rate powerhouses. Chapter 1948. Kai-Zi smiled. Is everyone here? Let's begin. The Alliance had many strong people and there were many cards that they could play. There was no need for Duque to lead the team personally every time. For the purpose of making use of resources, Duque would let the Guardians work as long as he found a suitable excuse. There was a special existence in the Thunder Throne of Thunder God Island, Guardian Laden. Since it involved a guardian, it must be another depravity drama. Tarim, who had been sold by Wisdom Loken once, hated betrayal and depravity the most. After some stupid dragon died, Tarim did not need to defend Otter. Under Du's instigation, he began to participate more in fighting against evil. For example, this time he came to be a thug again. It turned out that in history, the troublemaker Black Dragon Prince Lachio had gone to the Thunder Furnace on Thunder God Island and learned that the ancient devils had the powerful technology left behind by the Titans. He used the equipment to forge a sharp halberd and then collected the power of thunder from the Storm Dragon King's corpse. Lachio sent people to continue investigating the Thunder Throne and collect the stone slabs left behind by the Titans. Finally, he understood the mission and origin of the ancient devils. In this life. Sorry, I gave Lachio a cold song long ago. In fact, the ancient devils were once a pile of decorative stone statues in the experimental field of Pandaria. Under the effects of the curse of flesh and the spring water of Splendid Valley, they woke up and became flesh and blood, gaining life. The ancient devils who called themselves the Thunder God were not that great. 13,000 years ago, the Thunder God was just the son of a warlord. His goal was not only to conquer the weak races like his ancestors, but also to build a true empire. In order to achieve this goal, he traveled to the mysterious Peak of Thunder to search for the forgotten truth about the ancient devils and their power. He found something that opened his eyes: the Titan Guardian Laden, who guarded the powerful Titan artifact, the Narek Fiend engine. The Thunder God controlled both and then used this new power to proclaim himself the King of Thunder. He ruled Pandaria with tyranny until his death. Now he was resurrected and wanted to cause trouble again. Even though the powerful Zendala trolls and ancient devils had set up layers of defense in the Thunder Throne, the ferocious beasts hidden in the underground caves of the palace, and the monsters left behind by ancient devils' dark magic lurked in the palace sewers. But so what? The group of fire element demigods led by Kai Zi were enough to give them a hard time, not to mention Tarim and the other guardians to hold the fort. Most importantly, Duque had been using this method to emphasize the justice of the alliance among the guardians. Look, our alliance has killed another evil one and saved a fallen guardian. Under the imperceptible influence of day after day, the guardians had long regarded the alliance as a complete partner of justice, unknowingly tying themselves to the alliance. Someone who went against the alliance. Of course it was an evil force that had to be destroyed. This gorgeous lineup had easily defeated the Thunder God without the help of the Shadow Tracking Sect. They had even defeated the Berserk Guardian Laden. With the approval of Tarim and the other guardians, the alliance not only obtained the spoils of war from the boss, but also the Thunder God's heart. This heart originally belonged to Guardian Laiden, and the alliance was able to understand a key secret about the Titans. On this side, the Lightning God Island still had an unknown lightning god and a fallen guardian. On the side of the giant Beast Island, it was a complete annihilation. Without the annoying fog, there was no need to defend the dangerous caves that were getting deeper and deeper. Who knew why the Zendala trolls had trained so many giant beasts? To add food to the Alliance's soldiers? They had tested it out. The velociraptor meat on the giant Beast Island was not delicious. It was too tough. Unless it was the orcs with good teeth, no one would like that barbaric taste. In front of the Alliance's flying fleet, the army's cavalry, be it the Velociraptor Knights or any other knights, was a tragedy. The rarest thing was that there were no Pandaren living on the giant Beast Island. Without worrying about friendly fire, the Alliance's fleet madly poured out the old-fashioned cannonballs they had accumulated over the past 10 years. Cannonballs were like that. Once they expired, they would be dangerous and detonation would cost money. If they could not get rid of them within their expiration date, it would be a waste. Just like the Celestial Empire, in order to prepare for emergencies, they followed the Russians' standard and prepared 7.62mm bullets in units of hundreds of millions. The specific number was not something we commoners could know. We only knew that there were about 30 billion rounds. The Alliance's stockpile of cannonballs was also awesome. There were more than 200 million rounds. There was no way around it. Any main cannon had about 100 rounds of ammunition. A warship had a main cannon and a secondary cannon. The 460mm main cannon was matched with a 155mm cruiser-class secondary cannon. According to this ratio, no matter how stingy they were, they had to prepare more than 2,000 rounds of cannonballs of all sizes. The alliance now had nearly 10,000 large and small warships in the air and on the sea. 200 million rounds of ammunition was definitely not a small number. This was only because Duque had considered that cannonballs would be consumed quickly and that they would be innovated quickly. Even so, the cannonballs that were about to expire were always a headache for the alliance military. Now the problem was solved. While Naxxramas's air force attacked Thunder God Island, the alliance's fleet also attacked Giant Beast Island, as well as the Zandala fleet in the northeast corner of Pandaria, east of Kunlai Mountain. The fleet commanded by Zhou was nothing but huge. The wooden ships were no different from target ships in front of the alliance's warships. No, it should be said that when the alliance's gunners trained, they used obsolete wooden warships as target ships. The only difference was that there would be no people on the target ships, while the Zandala fleet had a large number of troll sailors. There's no suspense in killing them. It's like fighting primitive people. In the magnified image of the magic mirror, Admiral Taylor sighed as he watched the troll being blown away. 30 years ago we were also primitive people like this, Bulang Bronzebeard said directly in the magic communication. Yes, thanks to our leader we evolved from primitive times to modern times. Taylor, a man in his 40s and 50s, felt the changes in the human world the most. In just 30 years they had crossed the age of steam from the feudal era and entered the quasi-modern era. That was exactly the time it took for Taylor to go from a teenager to a middle-aged uncle. He was filled with emotion. Just as the Alliance's army quickly finished bulldozing the three places, Duque suddenly heard a voice. "Hello. Is this Mr. Duke Marcus? I have something to talk to you about." His fluent Chinese seemed to echo in her ears. Miraculously, Duque was in the secret room of Naxxramas. Duque's heart moved. He knew who was calling him. Chapter 1949. At Duque's level there were not many that could threaten Duque. There were many capable people in the world of Azeroth, and there were many that were worth looking up to or being wary of. When it came to Pandaria, there were only two existences that could make Duque take them seriously. One was Yashaji and the other was this one. Duque stood up, patted his clothes and gestured, "Be serious." The Black Dragon Girl and Vashj, who had been a bit lazy a moment ago, immediately became serious, and tidied up Duque's clothes in an orderly manner. Duque easily crossed the teleportation gate, and in the next second he appeared on Mount Kunlai's clear sun peak. It was not as cold as Northrend, but standing on this snow-covered peak of Pandaria, he could still feel a chill. The cold was meaningless to Duque, who had a demigod body. Moreover, as the Elemental Lord, Duque could control any of the four elements in the world of Azeroth at will. The ice elements here had only sensed Duque's presence, and they had already cheerfully lingered around Duque, forming a small ice tornado. But this ice tornado was very slow, and the dust and snowflakes carried by the wind could be easily seen with the naked eye. Duque did not care about the situation of the elements. From the start, all his attention was attracted by the old panda man, who was leaning on a walking stick, had a kind face and had extremely long white eyebrows and beard. He clearly looked like an old panda man, but even though he was a little hunchbacked, the natural aura he exuded made it seem as if he was one with heaven and earth. Duke could not help but raise his eyebrows. Normally, every animal that was independent of the natural environment of a planet would have an aura that was completely different from plants. This person's aura was not like that of an animal at all. No, it was not even like that of a living creature. Yet it gave Duque a natural and harmonious feeling. Oh ha! Mr.'s ability to control the elements is indeed amazing. That's great. Please forgive this old man's impetuousness. If you're in the mood, why don't you sit down and have a cup of tea then listen to this old man's story? The old Pandaren grinned. Then, as if he was performing a magic trick, he conjured two mats, a short tea table and a tea set. "Honored guest, please take a seat." Of course he didn't want to sit cross-legged or spread his legs and directly sit down. If Duque did this, the other party would not blame him but would treat him as a foreigner. As a transmigrator from the modern world, Duque knew the rules. He just didn't want to do it. In the end, Duque still did as the Romans do. Kneel down. It was a very heavenly style of sitting. Although this was Duque's first time doing this, he had watched so many period dramas and he had the system's help to replay the scenes. Moreover, after obtaining the body of a demigod, he had amazing control over his own body. As a result, Duque was able to sit up properly. "Oh, esteemed guest, you seem to have a deep understanding of the panda people's culture? The old panda man asked with a smile. A little. A little. Duque said humbly. The old pandarin didn't point it out and began to make tea. It was a little different from the way Duque knew how to make tea. The old pandarin's way of making tea was more old-fashioned. It was obviously the simplest way to wash a cup with boiling water, but under the huge black bear's paw, it was unusually light and graceful, like a white crane taking a bath. The tea powder that had been ground was scooped out of the teapot with a spoon. As soon as the teapot was opened, a faint fragrance could be smelled. After picking out a small amount of tea powder, he poured it into the teacup, mixed it with a small amount of boiling water and mixed it into a sticky paste. Then he picked up the teapot and poured some tea into the teacup. The whole set of actions was done smoothly and harmoniously. As Duque sat there, it was as if he was watching a godly performance. Not long after, the tea bowl in front of Duque, with a diameter of 15 centimeters, was filled with a bowl of evenly colored, gently swirling tea. Please. Duque held the teacup with both hands and placed it in front of him. He used a small amount of wind elemental energy to gather the aroma of the tea into the breeze and send it into his nose. At first, the fragrance was strong, but after a long time, there was a lingering fragrance lingering in the nasal cavity. This feeling was very magical. First smell, then taste. It really was the best. Before Duque crossed over, he was a boor. Tasting tea was not a skill that a college animal should have. He couldn't tell what was good about it. This kind of tea that left a lingering fragrance in the mouth and teeth was definitely not a lie. The old man's tea is very good. Duque made such an evaluation after searching through his barren tea ceremony memory. Oh he. If I didn't specifically understand your origin, I would be more willing to call you Mr. Du according to the Pandarin's custom, because I always feel that your surname should be Du and your name should be Ku. The old Pandarin said with a smile. Of course, if you think this is offensive, can I continue to call you Mr. Marcus? Duque, who was mentally prepared, didn't have the slightest psychological fluctuation. He took a sip of tea indifferently, put down the teacup with both hands, took out a handkerchief, wiped the tea on the corners of his mouth and then spoke. A name is just a code. Since Emperor Xiaohao is an old senior from 10,000 years ago, then whatever you call this junior is willing to accept it. That's right. The old Pandarin in front of him was actually the last Pandarin Emperor Xiaohao. Some people might ask, isn't Emperor Xiaohao dead? In the magical world of Azeroth, corpses could be resurrected after death, and ancient gods could come back to life after death. Emperor Xiaohao could split the entire continent and cover all of Pandaria with a fog 10,000 years ago. Did such a blockhead guy really not leave a will after death? Dumuk was the first to not believe it. Emperor Xiaohao smiled. If it weren't for your decent appearance, I would think of you as a Pandarin with the most complete and great inheritance. You flatter me. You're the panda. Your whole family are pandas. Bah. Why does it feel like I'm not scolding people? Duque, who was complaining in his heart, suddenly lost his temper. You and your alliance are too powerful, so powerful that even my clansmen and I are incomparably fearful of you. Regarding your invitation to us Pandarin to join the alliance, my people and I have to be cautious. After all, it's easy to join a powerful cross-racial alliance. Swallowed to the point that not even the bones are left. Duque smiled. It seems that you really understand Pandarin culture. This is what I'm most gratified about. Our Pandarin's customs and living habits are quite different from the existing races in the alliance. There are countless powerful races in Pandaria. My ancestors and I spent countless years but failed to integrate them into an equal and peaceful organization. Differences in culture and ideology are the most likely to cause conflicts and even wars. Emperor Xiaohao sighed. Chapter 1950. Indeed. Duque nodded. Conflicts often originate from misunderstandings, and misunderstandings can easily turn into conflicts. After understanding Yashaji's murderous aura, I found that it's the most unwanted. That's why I've always been wary and suspicious of the alliance. That's normal. But the alliance has done a good job. I should say it's done too well. I can't find a reason to refuse to join now. Emperor Xiaohao sighed. Then join us. Duke was rather straightforward, directly inviting them to join. Can I quit after joining the alliance? Xiaohao asked. Do you know about the Burning Legion? Yes. That's right. The Legion will definitely come again and it'll probably happen in the next 10 years. As long as they survive Sardra's revenge war, the Pandaren can quit the alliance at will. Even if they quit, the alliance will still promise not to invade the Pandaren's territory. Okay. Then I have no objections. Xiahou nodded. Duke heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. He had won over the entire Pandaren race to join the alliance, instead of the small water faction in history. The Pandaren had a very high proportion of professionals, and they had a complete set of professions. They were a very good addition to the alliance. Being able to trick the Pandaren that dominated most of Pandaria into joining the alliance was the greatest help to the alliance. In order to settle this matter, Duke had indirectly guided the public opinion. He first let Brainless Roar seek death, and exposed the cruelty of the tribe led by Brainless Roar to the son of Pandaria. Then he guided Qin's Storm Liquor, who had the protagonist Halo, and cooperated with Zhu Talon to quickly spread the news to the ears of every Pandaren in Pandaria. The Pandaren were a gentle race, but that didn't mean they didn't have a temper. With the powerful but polite alliance as a reference, the massacre and enslavement of the tribe easily made all the Pandaren angry and condemned the tribe. In fact, this laid a strong foundation for the Pandaren to join the alliance. In fact, this was also the strategy that the Chinese were best at. Just like the peasant uprisings in the history of ancient China, the initiator first had to make the masses stand with him and make the masses hate their enemies. Duque had done this with the help of Brainless Roar. His propaganda method was too brilliant. The alliance did not directly participate in the manipulation of public opinion. They only let old Qin, a Pandaren who had wandered out to the outside world and killed his way back to find his roots, spread the ferocity of the tribe. From the airship crashing into the Lost Island, almost causing Shenzhen to kneel, to the trivial matter of the jadeite forest. Even if Xiahou had a feeling that Duque was behind this, he had no evidence. Moreover, the alliance was indeed kind. Without the invitations of so many Pandaren leaders, they wouldn't even take half a step into Pandaria. The Pandaren had no choice but to accept this favor. If it wasn't for the Pandaren being completely blinded and unable to deal with Sha, the Horde, the Zandala trolls, the Demonkin ancients and the Mantis people, the alliance would not have entered the battlefield. Since he had decided to bring the Pandaren into the pit, Xiahou would not pursue this matter anymore. Yes, Duke, you're interested in hearing it. The nagging of a 10,000-year-old panda? Sure. I don't have to do anything to deal with those dregs anyway. Duque nodded calmly. That was 10,000 years ago or even longer than that. At that time, the Well of Eternity was still the Well of Eternity, and Kalimdor was still the land of eternal starlight. However, the Pandaren dynasty on Pandaria had lasted for countless years and generations. The Panda Empire was established after overthrowing the Demonkin's enslavement. The burden on the Panda Emperor was quite heavy in order to stand alone among the many powerful and warlike races of Pandaria. The Pandaren had no doubt that the current Crown Prince, Xiahou, was definitely a future leader worthy of great responsibility. The Crown Prince had once cultivated in the Heaven Zen Temple and was a martial monk with great skills. He loved the people as if they were his own children and allied with the outside world. His brilliant diplomatic skills ensured that the Pandaren lived in harmony with the Jinyu people, the monkey race, the Gumo and the Yengu races. Other than the Mantis people and the Demonkin, he even became close friends with the monkey race's leader, the Monkey King. After the Crown Prince ascended the throne, history called him Emperor Xiahou. According to the ancient tradition of the Panda Empire, the new emperor had to go to the jadeite forest to visit the elders of the Jinyu people. The elders of the Jinyu people had the mysterious ability to predict the future through flowing water, but the prophecy that Xiahou heard was unexpectedly cruel and terrifying. The night elves would provoke the Burning Legion, and the latter's iron hooves would completely destroy everything in Kalimdor, including Pandaria. Emperor Xiahou, who had just ascended the throne, understood from that moment on that there was no more comfortable throne for him. His life would be full of ups and downs, and all the glory and wealth that belonged to an emperor would have no chance with him. He had to set off immediately and begin a journey of salvation that concerned the future of Pandaria. This journey was only bitter and there was no joy. He could only succeed and not fail. Emperor Xiahou, who petitioned for the people, had traveled many roads and asked many people. In the long and tiring journey, he finally thought of borrowing the wisdom of the mighty Heavenly Lord. For this reason, he personally climbed the highest peak of the cold Azeroth to seek the advice of the Jade Serpent. The Jade Serpent did not disappoint him. Here Xiaohao finally found a way that seemed to be able to save everything. He had to release the burden on his body, purify his body and mind and harmonize himself with the land of Pandaria. The Jade Serpent's mysterious answer made Emperor Xiaohao fall into deep confusion. What was the burden to let go of? How could he purify his body and mind? How could he become one with nature? Unexplainable questions made him lose the mood to ask about politics. He thought hard all day but still could not understand the mystery in the Jade Serpent's words. Maybe it was because he was not capable enough? Then was an emperor who did not have the ability to save his people worthy of sitting on the throne? The sense of failure and powerlessness made him extremely depressed. The burden of all kinds of negative emotions was so heavy that he almost could not breathe. He felt that he could not hold on any longer. Seeing that his good friend was in great doubt and frowning, the Monkey King tried his best to help Emperor Xiaohao. He came to the jadeite forest and tried to use bamboo to make a strange magic mask, wanting to use it to make Emperor Xiaohao happy. Unexpectedly, this method worked. Emperor Xiaohao's doubt was absorbed by the mask and he was no longer doubtful. However, he also did not expect that after they buried the magic mask that absorbed Emperor Xiaohao's doubt deep underground, a monster that could create doubt appeared. They called it Sha. Hearing this, Duque sighed. Is this the origin of the Sha ? Yes. How did you deal with the Sha ? The only way is to control and seal it. Even with me and the Monkey King who are highly skilled in martial arts, it took us more than half a day to finally subdue the Sha. This time the Sha is really sealed in the jadeite forest. Chapter 1951. Recalling the past, Emperor Xiaohao was full of emotions. It was only then that I finally understood that Jade Dragon wanted me to eliminate negative emotions like doubt in my heart one by one in order to finally obtain the ability to save Pandaria. 7 burdens, 7 kinds of negative emotions. After Xiaohao sealed violence, anger, hatred, and so on, all his negative emotions were sealed, and the Pandaren of the Shadow Sect had no choice but to become the secret guardians behind Pandaria for generations, specializing in sealing and monitoring malevolence. After removing all 7 burdens, my body and mind are completely clean, and these tasks have been used for a long time in the passage of time. Azeroth is now at the end of the ancient war and it's getting closer and closer to the prophecy. And I suddenly realized a problem. According to the method I used to save Pandaria, wouldn't the old enemy, the Mantis Men, also be saved? As if asking himself, Xiaohao stroked his beard. Duque nodded. Yes, indeed, I heard that Pandaren and Mantis Men fought on the battlefield all year round, and their hatred was deep. If it were me, it would be difficult to make such a decision easily. That's right, the Monkey King advised me from the side, reminding me of a fact. Once every 100 years the Mantis Men will attack the Pandaran's coiled dragon ridge. This cycle has become an inseparable part of Pandaria. If the water is too clear there will be no fish. Although the Pandaren and Mantis Men's relationship is difficult to ease, it is also inseparable. If we don't save them we can't save the Pandaren themselves. When I figured this out, I also completely understood the true meaning of Jade Dragon's words. Everyone knew what happened next. Xiaohao sacrificed himself to save the entire Pandaria. Perhaps this statement was not entirely correct, he just merged with Pandaria. Old Master Xiaohao, you are indeed great. Duque's words were not flattery. Sacrificing oneself to help the entire race was a great feat. Duque always felt that if it was his turn, he might not be able to do it. Deep down, Duque was a layman. He liked to show off, was also afraid of death and liked all kinds of girls. The biggest difference between him and the evil sex was that he didn't mind saving the world when he was having intimate moments with the ladies. Even though Duque now had the power to stir up the entire world, he still felt that he had not changed. The world has changed. Pandaria and Pandaren were not the only ones who could change the world. The future is still in the hands of youngsters like you. As he said that, Emperor Xiaohao, who had the appearance of an old panda man, suddenly had a glint in his eyes. Just this gaze alone made Duque think that pandas were actually ferocious beasts. Sure enough, in the next second Xiaohao's words shook Duque to the core. There will be no fish when the water is too clear. I still want to emphasize this point. If it's fate, then I have nothing to say. But if it's deliberately nurturing hatred, then that's not advisable. That tribe led by Gurus, you were the one who let them into Pandaria, right? The old panda man's vision was indeed unique. as expected of a demigod powerhouse who had existed in this world for more than 10,000 years. Duque was speechless, but after thinking about it, it made sense. On Thunder God Island, the Alliance fleet had certainly shown its muscles. But that also proved that if the Alliance fleet had really gone all out, the tribe's wooden airships would not have had a chance to reach Pandaria. For a moment, Duque wanted to use an excuse to get over it. For example, the Alliance couldn't see the tribe's warships at night, or the tribe's illegal immigration. But when he met that pair of excessively sharp and distinct black and white eyes, Duque felt that it was meaningless. Gently holding the teacup, Duque took another sip of the hot tea and then calmly put the teacup down. After the initial second of slight panic, Duque, who had calmed down, had vaguely become more pretentious. Because he had completely let go. At this moment, in Duque's fearless eyes, there was only one meaning: a monk doesn't lie. If I say I'll kill your family, I'll kill your family. Duque admitted frankly, if you want to destroy it, you must first make it crazy. Anyway, it was fate that the tribe came to Pandaria. I just gave them a push. The old panda demigod's gaze became sharper. Do you know that there were tens of thousands of parallel timelines that were almost identical to this world outside this timeline? I know a thing or two, Xiaohao replied. There are none now. Duque picked up the teacup again and took another sip. I destroyed a small part of it, but most of it was devoured by the world's main timeline. We are making our own choices, and the world is also making its own. Emperor Xiaohao's expression froze, and he was so stunned that he couldn't speak. There is only one timeline left leading to the future. I'm just making the choice I think is appropriate. What about the panda people? Emperor Xiaohao's eyes became a little dim. As if possessed, he began to mutter to himself, then, was everything I did wrong? Where is the future of the panda people? Duque put down the teacup. This time he didn't pick it up again. He stood up and looked down at Emperor Xiaohao, who was still kneeling. I admire the ideals of the panda people and I respect your folklore. As long as I can do it, the Alliance will give the panda people as much freedom as possible. But this isn't a reason to stop the entire Azeroth from moving forward. When the freedom of an individual and a race is in conflict with the future of the world will make its own choice. At this point, Xiaohao's soul heart thumped violently. Tens of thousands of years of history tell us. The essence of war has never changed, and that is to fight for survival. I don't want to be a hypocritical politician, shouting freedom is more important than life, before the war begins. Then when the war can no longer be endured, raising their arms and shouting life is the most precious. I just want to tell you one thing, Emperor Xiaohao. Go ahead. Xiaohao replied. Times have changed. What peace, what struggle and interrogation of human nature. In the face of the survival of the race, they are nothing but illusory superstructures. What the Alliance and I need is a firm ally who can win the apocalypse against the Burning Legion. Not a pig-like teammate who will drag us down. If the panda people can't do it, then I'm sorry. Duque opened the portal. He had already made his stand clear. If the panda people still didn't know what was good for them, then Duque couldn't do anything about it. Perhaps he wouldn't attack the panda people's territory, but from this moment on he would act according to the needs and wishes of the Alliance. Just as Duque was about to step into the portal, Emperor Xiaohao smiled bitterly. The panda people are willing to join the Alliance wholeheartedly. Chapter 1952. While Duque was chatting with Emperor Xiaohao over tea, the tribe did not stop their march. It was different from the original history. It turned out that the Alliance tribe first drifted to Pandaria during a naval war, and then Admiral Taylor of the Alliance. In addition, William's only son Andoin also came, which attracted the attention of the higher-ups of both sides. They gradually increased the exploration of Pandaria and invested more troops. After the frontline troops began to send back reports, big shots such as Wajin and Tyrant entered the battlefield. It was completely different in this life. Duque, who was well aware of the situation in Pandaria, planned everything before taking action. The great chief of the tribe, Gurus, was tempted by the evil voice in his heart. He directly abandoned his perplexity, ignored all the details and led the army straight to the splendid valley. Along the way he did not even separate from the main force, and directly killed his way to the destination, leaving only the minimum number of sentries to monitor the movements of the Alliance. In fact, even these so-called sentries were mixed with water droplets. In the name of monitoring the Alliance, Gurus left all the sick and injured soldiers behind. He did not even leave any supplies and only gave them the right to burn, kill and loot at will. Hence, there were even the elites of small clans in the tribe who took the initiative to leave the main force in order to encircle the most fertile land as their clan's future territory. This caused a large number of people to fall behind, but their morale did not drop. The orcs' thinking was that simple. When they went to a new place there would be prey and enemies. Well, once the enemies were killed, the prey would all belong to the orcs. No matter what, they had to get rid of the eyesore first. At the moment of war with the Alliance, the orcs under Brainless Roar were even more unscrupulous. It was precisely because he knew this that Duque was not worried at all that Emperor Xiaohao would side with the tribe. After all, the tribe in this life was even more unscrupulous. Besides, Xiaohao, who had tied his soul to Pandaria, could clearly understand things that he could not have known when he was immortal. For example, he could vaguely see the fate. Duque was not wrong. The tribe would indeed cause trouble in Pandaria, and it would be with Yashaji. The only difference from this predetermined fate was that the alliance was cleaner and more noble. The brutality of the tribe pushed the Pandaren further towards the alliance. If Emperor Xiaohao didn't even know how to choose, then he wouldn't deserve to be called the greatest emperor of all time. In fact, the moment Xiaohao agreed, Duque knew that the alliance had achieved a complete victory in the mystery of Pandaria. All that was left was to follow the flow of fate. Just as he stepped through the portal, Duque turned around and smiled. Things like abscesses will only rot the body if left unattended. Sometimes he had to be ruthless and let out the pus and blood before cutting off the rotten tissue. We can still hope for a full recovery. Emperor Xiaohao was stunned, and then he stroked his beard and smiled bitterly. Of course, he knew what Duque was referring to. On the other side, the horde was marching in. Without the hindrance of the alliance, Xiaohao told the leaders of the Pandaren organizations in their dreams to evacuate the civilians in advance. The advance of the horde became unusually smooth. Under the guidance of Yashaji's mind, Garrush headed west from the north of the Emerald Gorge almost without any obstacles. As long as he entered Kunlai Mountain and passed through the Gate of God, he would be able to reach the splendid gorge. Originally, Garrush wanted to go in a straight line and let his subordinates cross the lake and head west. Unfortunately, this was the territory of the Ink-Fin goldfish people. Although Vasht had told the goldfish people to hide and pretend that there was no danger here, no one knew who the F*ck told them, or who the F*ck mentioned that Dooku had drowned 1,000,000 orcs in a battle 30 years ago. For once, Brainless Roar was wise and actually changed his mind. The Horde army went all the way south and arrived near the Thunder Forest of the Emerald Forest. Through the bridge built by the Pandaren, they entered the misty boardwalk from the west, turned north, passed through the ancient road and finally arrived at the Gate of God. On the ancient road, Brainless Roar suffered the first large-scale attack of the Alliance. The shameless Dooku ordered some flying warships to cover the transport ships into Pandaria and laid more than 10,000 new magic mines at the exit of the ancient road. This type of landmine was different from the traditional triggering landmines. It had to absorb enough earth elements before it could be activated. After absorbing enough earth elements, the surface of the mine would be covered with a layer of soil. It looked no different from an ordinary stone. Therefore, there was no need to bury them at all. They just let the flying transport ships circle in the sky and open the big belly of the ships as if they were laying eggs. Then, when a group of Horde warriors walked past the pile of delayed triggered mines, an inexplicable premonition of impending disaster suddenly spread in the heart of the Horde's vanguard commander, General Nazgrin. Retreat! Retreat! He immediately screamed, but he was still a step too late. A crimson flame erupted from the ground like a small-scale volcanic eruption, and instantly exploded in the middle of the 3 rows of infantry. Almost in the blink of an eye, 2 squads of soldiers, Kukuran, who had gone through countless battles and gladiators and was recognized as the best fighter and the most loyal to Great Chief Garrush, were turned into ashes. The rest were all crippled with broken arms and legs. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! The large group of Horde warriors in the middle and at the back nervously gripped their weapons and looked around. Unfortunately, there was nothing. What happened? Garrush walked out from the middle of the troops. General Nazgrin reported everything to his great chief. I'm familiar with this smell, no need to ask. It's the usual trick of the despicable people taught by that damn Duke Marcus. Don't worry, this is our enemy being afraid. Garrush said rudely, pass the order, speed up. But Nazgrin looked troubled. I don't care what method you use, I just want to see the results. With that, Garrush returned to his guards. This world was magical. For example, they had professions. And the warrior profession had the magical skill, shield wall. The most exaggerated scene of human mind clearing in the history of the Horde appeared. Countless warriors of the Horde, regardless of their levels, were all lined up at the front line. They used their warrior skills to deflect the terrible damage, all for the sake of creating a safe path for their compatriots. Boom. Boom boom boom. No one knew how many professional warriors had their legs blown off, but they did not choose to become injured. Instead, they used themselves as mind-clearing tools and rolled to the unknown road ahead. Duque, along with many alliance leaders, watched this scene quietly in Naxxramas and did not speak for a long time. Jaina sighed. Heroic warriors unfortunately following a stupid and crazy leader. They have a better way to solve the problem. Jurban also sighed. Unfortunately, with their wisdom, they can only come up with this slightly tragic and stupid solution. Chapter 1953. Duque was speechless at Braindead Roar's IQ and EQ. In his opinion, he had at least 10,000 ways to solve this problem. For example, he could find a few unlucky people to test the triggering mode of the landmines. Was it pressure sensing, biological sensing, or elemental sensing? If he found a way, it would be better to let the goblins install rollers to open the way. Unfortunately, his brain was not good and he was not knowledgeable enough. Duque snapped his fingers. Second stage. Soon, the advancing Horde army discovered that another nightmare had arrived. Countless small robots with two ridiculous mechanical legs and big red flashing lights on their heads charged at the Horde with ridiculous steps. If there was a veteran general like Farrokh Salyafar in the Horde army, he would definitely not be unfamiliar with these things. Because it was the nightmare that he had brought to the Horde in the second year of the Dark Portal. Mobile alarm system. Nearly 30 years ago, the magical craftsmanship of the gnomes had created a special robot called Demon Spirit by the players of the Celestial Empire. What the Horde was facing now was the upgraded version of the Demon Spirit of the Journey to the West. What did that mean? The Demon Spirit that would send you to the Western Paradise. Although the Horde warriors were extremely vigilant, they could not avoid the Demon Spirits that were charging at them from all directions when the front was clearing the mines and the middle and rear parts of the army were completely blocked. As a self-destructing unit, this new type of robot used 2 layers of armor. There was a thick layer of baffle at the front, and the outermost layer in the other directions was a thin iron sheet that was easy to break. Between the 2 layers of armor, there was a large amount of small metal lumps and scraps left over from metallurgy and manufacturing. When a demon spirit rushed into the midst of the Horde soldiers, the Alliance thief in charge of controlling it from afar would press a designated button while invisible. Through elemental control, the demon spirit would send all the Horde soldiers within a 10-meter radius to the Western Paradise. Bang, bang, bang. Flesh and blood flew everywhere. Broken limbs spun in the air. The continuous explosions brought great panic to the Horde. Unfortunately, the orcs' strength lay in close combat. When the Darkspear trolls left the Horde lost their best hunters and archers. It was not that the orcs did not have hunters, but they were not as good as the trolls. Very quickly, not only the front of the group but also the back of the ancient road, tens of thousands of Yao spirits that were flickering with dazzling red light caught up. They were like the messengers of death and also like the whips of God that drove the orcs away. They stimulated the nerves of the tribal warriors even more. I give the order. Everyone split into echelons and charge forward. Brainless Roar finally couldn't help but issue a rather rash order. Batches after batches of tribal soldiers began to form a single line, charging forward every 20 meters. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The continuous explosions created a cruel and bloody path of death. Naxxramas' hoof was a little puzzled. Why don't we just send the flying fleet in? This is bloodletting. Queen Sylvie's eyes flashed. If we go all out, we can just shoot down all the airships in the sea around Duroder. There's no need to go through so much trouble. Muradin continued. But we also don't want too many powerful tribal warriors to obtain the power of Yashaji. After all, no one knew to what extent the so-called evil Qi could strengthen ordinary soldiers. If every tribal warrior became a humanoid tank, then the alliance would have a headache. So we reduced the number of tribal soldiers in advance? Hoof seemed to understand. It's not bad. Admiral, you've improved. Duque praised her. Psych. I feel like you guys are a little like Eridar. Duque firmly denied this. He activated the holy light in his body on the spot. Immediately, Duque's body shone with a golden light, even brighter than the god of light. Tyron was annoyed. Come on, who doesn't know that you can use your shadow form to sneak into the Burning Legion? Duque was speechless. Speaking of which, that was a very long story. He still remembered that he pretended to be the bad guy and kissed Tyrant, and seemed to have forced her to do all kinds of shameful things. Then there was the 10,000 years of shelving play. I've gone too far. Duque would not force an awkward conversation or anything like that. Bloodletting and whatnot, it was fine as long as it was appropriate. The Alliance used all kinds of strange methods to harass the tribe and make the tribe bleed continuously. After all, Duque did not know if the tribal warriors in this life, after being strengthened by the murderous aura, would be able to use their faces to take a bullet and not die. The tribe was prepared to attack the door of the heavenly gods with a domineering attitude, only to find that the door was already open. Yashaji's murderous aura directly ignored the will of the four gods from the inside, and burst open the door. The overjoyed brainless roar, under the guidance of Yashaji's remnant will, sent troops and goblin diggers to destroy a mountain and a lake in the splendid valley. In the depths of the excavated cave, they found the heart of the ancient god Yashaji, who was imprisoned by the Titan Guardians. Then the area was taken over by the Kukuran army. At the same time, little Andoin, under the escort of the Alliance's elite team, visited the temples of the four celestial lords in Pandaria, and learned from them about strength, tenacity, wisdom, and the meaning of hope. He also passed the trials of the celestial lords and received their blessings. In the end, little Andoin used the blessings of the four celestial lords to create a legendary cloak for his father. On the other hand, the clueless Zhu Talon finally caught up to Brainless Roar. He brought a large number of Pandaren guards to guard the original palace of the ancient fiendish mountain. However, Zhu Talon was destined to be unable to stop Garush Hellroar's ambition. Because the seventh evil had appeared. The seventh evil was called the Proud Evil, and it was the last sin that the Pandaren Emperor Xiaohao could not escape from. Under its influence, the emperor used a fog to cover the land. For 10,000 years, the Proud Evil had been waiting for an opportunity. When Garush awakened the heart of Yashaji, the power of pride in his heart allowed the dark energy to merge perfectly with his body. The tribe's war drums had already been beaten, and the deafening battle cries filled the beautiful valley. The huge box that carried the heart of the ancient god, the heart of Yashaji, was transported to the lake in front of the palace of the ancient fiendish mountain under the escort of the Kukuran guards. Garush, whose strength had been greatly increased, felt that he was in a better state than ever. That boundless power, that surging sense of excitement that seemed to be able to blow up a mountain with a single punch, stimulated his nerves all the time. The voice in his heart became louder and louder. There was only one last step left. Garush raised his brown-red head and ordered, "I can feel the hunger of this heart. Throw it into the lake." Chapter 1954. The lake in front of the ancient Fiend Mountain Palace was not ordinary water. The ancient inhabitants of Pandaria realized the importance of the energy pool. It had the power to give life, so they built an underground water system to protect the water source and nourish the living beings in the splendid valley. If Yashaji's heart was thrown in, although Yashaji would not be able to resurrect with such a small amount of vitality, it would still be a very important step on the road of resurrection. Stop those evil orcs. Among the Pandaren professionals, monks were the most common. Originally, in a large-scale battle, there was no place for the Pandaren to move around in a situation where the minions were facing each other. However, the uneven terrain of the splendid valley, coupled with the fact that the tribe did not pay much attention to the perfection of formations, resulted in a chaotic battle. More tribal warriors rushed over, but the green figures did not drown the black and white figures. In the chaotic battle, the stronger Pandaren still had the upper hand even when facing the heavily armed orc warriors who had begun to be infected by the murderous aura. When the Pandaren were still under the rule of the ancient fiends, it was the monks who brought some hope to Pandaria's bleak future. Due to being deprived of the right to use weapons by the rulers at that time, the Pandaren focused on practicing using chi to fight with bare hands. When the time was ripe for an uprising, the well-trained Pandaren had enough ability to shatter the shackles of enslavement. Monks were good at fighting with bare hands, and when fighting the enemy, they did not only rely on the power of their weapons. Although they were famous for their powerful punches and kicks, the fierce attacks of the monks were never restricted by their moves. Many monks were more inclined to use seemingly stumbling movements and drunken gazes to turn the enemy's attacks invisible, while their comrades attacked when the enemy was confused. Other monks were good at summoning the divine power of the mist to regulate the energy in their comrades' bodies, promoting blood circulation, removing blood stasis and treating injuries. It was the Pandaren professionals led by the monks who fought on the front line. The Pandaran's front line barely withstood the ferocious attacks of the orcs who had been infected by the murderous aura. However, when Gurus led the Kukkuran guards to the front line, the situation suddenly became extremely bad for the Pandaren. In the eyes of many Chinese players including Duque, the Kukkuran guards were similar to the German SS back then. They were responsible for protecting the leader's life and were also the elite field army on the tribe's side. They were a powerful force loyal to the great chieftain, no matter who ascended to the position of great chieftain. They were the warriors who defended the glory, the vanguard who eradicated the enemy. They were always the first to charge into the enemy lines and the last to leave. They were the elites of the elites of the elites that no other troop in the horde could hope to match. In the original history from the establishment of Agrima, whether it was destroying Illidan's forces in Moon Shadow Valley, going to Northrend to end the threat of the Lich King, or eliminating Varimathas and his rebels under the Undercity, Kukkuran had made great contributions to the horde in every battle he participated in. As the Kukkuran guards who were absolutely loyal to the chief, they were the sharpest blades of the tribe. Almost in an instant at least 300 Pandaren monks who were fighting on the front line were cut down to the ground. Correspondingly, nearly 200 members of the Kukkuran guards would rest eternally in Splendid Valley. But right after that, even more guards rushed over with deafening roars, taking the place of their comrades. The Pandaren, who had lived in peace for too long and had never seen such a ferocious enemy, were thrown into disarray. They had more skilled and sharper combat skills, but they were forced into a panic by the opponent's method of exchanging injuries and lives for lives. The powerful inner strength of the monks could ignore the thick armor of the Kukkuran guards and directly hit their internal organs. Often, when the Pandaren killed the Kukkuran guards, they would also be dragged into the Yellow Springs by the opponent's dying blow. When Zhou Xian's most elite group of monks suffered heavy losses, the Pandaren began to crumble. At this moment, a huge pontoon bridge made of goblins suddenly slammed down from the shore and directly connected to the ancient Devil Mountain's palace. Great Chieftain Gurus carried the famous blood howl and strode onto the pontoon bridge. Suddenly, a gust of wind rolled up from the other end of the pontoon bridge. The wind quickly gathered into a ball, revealing the figure of the Shadow Sect's leader, Zhou Xian. "Enough!" Zhou Xian shouted. He stretched his left hand forward and made a sword gesture, while his right hand kept his unique two-handed hammer behind his back. Half of the Pandaran's face was covered by a bamboo hat, but there was a pair of black and white eyes full of anger. "You have gradually drifted further and further down the path of evil," Hell screamed. "But it ends here." "Ah!" Gurus let out a burst of wild laughter. He waved his left hand and bared his teeth. "Get lost, Pandaren. This is an unstoppable force." Zhou Xian snorted coldly. "Your father had also dabbled in the so-called unstoppable force." "What happened? No, what decision did he make in the end?" When Zhou Xian said this, Duque, who was watching the screen, suddenly felt that the sky was falling. It was all his fault for stirring up trouble. If this was the original history, of course, Lord Howl would have fought Manaroth to the death. It could be said that he had been enlightened after seeking benevolence. The problem was that in this life, Lord Howl had become a great hero of the tribe. He had participated in many battles against evil and had even fought Si Thun before retreating. In the end, when he died, he still followed Duque. In the eyes of the Alliance, this was glory. Of course, in the eyes of brainless Howl, this was a disgrace. His father had given up the powerful power of the devil's blood. It was a good thing to wash his name clean, but the bad thing was that he kept his promise and went to serve a human demigod after his death. Well, in a sense, Zhou Xian's mockery was very successful. Roar, 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 brainless Howl was completely enraged. With a momentum that could kill 18 generations of Zhou Xian's ancestors, he charged on the pontoon bridge and swept toward Zhou Xian like a gust of wind. The elephant trunk axe, blood howl, emitted a terrifying blood aura as it drew a mournful arc in the air. Every time Gurus swung his arm, he was filled with anger as if he wanted to split the abominable Pandaren in front of him in half. If it had been an ordinary expert who had stepped into the realm of heroes, he would probably have been defeated within 3 moves. Zhou Xian nimbly dodged the violent axe. He was clearly only an inch away from the axe several times, but it was so close that it was worlds apart. Brainless Howl never hit Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian saw an opportunity. When the axe slammed into the wooden planks of the pontoon bridge, Brainless Howl was stuck for a moment when he was about to pull the axe out. At that moment Zhou Xian made his move. Chapter 1955. Zhou Xian took out his two-handed hammer, which looked like a mace and a fork at the same time. The shape of the hammer affected the appearance of the city. It looked like the pincers of a lobster. It was completely black with one long and one short like a fork. There were cone-shaped spikes on all sides of the hammer's head. Whoever was hit by it would be left with a bloody hole. Unfortunately, Garush grabbed the stick at the bottom of the hammer with one hand. Seeing that they were about to fall into a battle of pure strength, Zhou Xian was certainly not going to fight like a fool. He suddenly retracted his body and let go of the handle of the hammer with his right hand. In the palm of his free right hand, there was a Pandaren version of Rasengan. True Chi Explosion. Zhou Xian condensed a true energy vortex and wanted to slap Braindead Roar in the face and teach him how to turn an ugly face into a chrysanthemum. He had underestimated the toughness of Braindead Roar's body. The tribal chief did not dodge and punched Zhou Xian's true energy vortex. Bang! There was a sound similar to a violent explosion in the air. Confirming the law of action and reaction, Garush was unscathed. Instead it was Zhou Xian who was almost sent flying. Zhou Xian's broad and thick panda paws scratched the wooden pontoon for a full 20 meters before he finally stopped moving backward. Although he looked good when he slid backward, the gap in strength made Zhou Xian frown deeply. Ha! Braindead Roar shouted and suddenly launched the Hellscream clan's ancestral leap slash. Others might think that as long as they were not stupid they would not take the attack head-on. Only the members of the Hellscream clan could truly understand the horror of this move. The roar was not to be underestimated. The essence of the warrior's fear-breaking roar was contained in this roar. If it was a slightly weaker opponent, they would have died on the spot after being shocked by this deafening roar of at least 300 decibels. This was not only a declaration of combat strength, but also a suppression of willpower. In a sense, this was an extremely powerful spiritual shock that was far above the Shadow Priest's Mind Blast. It was even comparable to Yaxaron's light spiritual erosion. It was under the suppression of his will that Garush leaped high into the air. His huge body drew an arc of death in the air, and the mournful red light on his blood roar was so bright that the lake beneath his feet was suffused with a crimson color. Die! Garush felt that he had succeeded. But he had overestimated his skills and underestimated Zhou Xian's willpower. After being controlled by Sha once, Zhou Xian struggled out of his mental confusion. His willpower had more than doubled. The dignified Shadow Trace sect leader who was in charge of suppressing Sha was actually controlled by Sha. What kind of humiliation was that? In the face of shame, some people were unable to recover from the setback and sank into depravity. Some people became braver and stronger as they suffered setbacks. It was clear that Zhou Xian belonged to the latter group. Zhou Xian seemed to be in a daze for a moment, but it was only when Blood Roar slashed at him that he revealed his prowess as a martial arts master of the Shadow Trace sect. The hammer that looked like a lobster's pincers stuck out at just the right time and easily diverted the impact of Garush's slash. It was as if Garush had thrown the blood howl out himself. What shocked Garush the most was that he felt a strange repulsion. Blood Roar was rejecting him. To be more precise, it was rejecting the killing intent in his body. This was the real reason he had been disarmed by Zhou Xian and thrown away Blood Roar. What? Are you saying that I'm not good enough for you? Blood Roar. Garush roared in his heart. He was furious. His pride and anger drove him on. On the other side, Zhou Xian was overjoyed that he had successfully disarmed his opponent. But as soon as he turned around he saw a fist the size of a water tank rapidly enlarging in his field of vision. Ha! It was a right hook without any fancy tricks. The only thing special about it was that it was fast. Ruthless. At that moment, Zhou Xian felt as if he had been hit by the ram of a human warship. Pfft! Zhu Talon was sent flying by the punch and smashed through the guardrail of the pontoon behind him. Just as he was about to fall into the pool, his black eyes suddenly turned and clarity returned to them. With a magnificent movement of the white crane's wings, coupled with his lightness skill, he tapped the surface of the pool with his sharp panda claws, causing ripples to appear on the calm surface. The next moment he flew into the air and used the rising dragon fist to perform a physical reconstructive surgery on Garush's trapezoidal chin. Brainless Roar was sent flying and crashed onto the pontoon in a sorry state. Zhu Talon stood on one of the guardrails of the pontoon and shouted, "I've dealt with both the minotaurs and the trolls. No wonder they left their tribes and left you. You really don't deserve to be their great chief." As he spoke, Zhu Talon leaped 30 meters into the air. Then, with the momentum of a falling comet, he gave the fallen Garush a heaven-crippling kick. If the kick landed, Brainless Roar's head would definitely explode like a rotten watermelon, splattering ketchup all over the ground. At that moment, Duque, who was munching on melon seeds and naxramas, was speechless. "If you want to kill me, just do it. What's the point of talking so much?" Sure enough, just like in history, a hilarious scene unfolded. Once again, Zhu Talon had underestimated Garush's ability to resist attacks after being strengthened by the murderous aura. Garush dodged the kick with a crouch and a forward roll. Zhu Talon used so much force that he broke the plank of the pontoon and got his foot stuck. Taking advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Garush leaped to the side of his blood howl. With one hand holding the blood howl, he tossed out the broken chain of the pontoon bridge with the other. From behind, he used the chain to strangle Zhu Talon's neck like a cowboy would do with a rope loop. "They don't deserve to join my orthodox tribe." With a sudden tug, Zhu Talon, who had nowhere to run, was pulled over like a kite. Pfft! Garush missed again. He finally confirmed that Blood Howl was indeed resisting him. He should have split the abominable Pandaren in half, but the direction of Blood Howl's axe changed automatically. The blunt side of the axe hit Zhu Talon's abdomen. Only a small part of the axe blade cut through his belly. The Pandaran's belly saved him. The wound was deep and bleeding, but it was a flesh wound, not a fatal one. Blarg! Zhu Talon vomited blood on the spot. On the other side, Duque, who was watching the battle, could not bear to watch. Zhu Talon was actually quite good at fighting, but he had terrible luck. Almost every time he appeared, he would vomit blood. As a result, people called him Grandmaster Vomiting Blood. Even so, he managed to escape the fate of being killed. Chapter 1956. Zhu Talon spat out blood and cursed, "Cough, cough, cough. Everyone will know what my tribe has done. They will find you and kill you." Garush displayed his arrogance with a ferocious expression. "Come. I'm waiting for them. I'll be waiting for those arrogant enemies like Duke Marcus. In my fortress they will face my own masterpiece of terror. They will witness my endless power and fall at my feet one by one. Anyone who dares to oppose my tribe will be impaled on the spire of Orgrimmar. You Pandaren are trying to bury your hatred and anger. But their power is unstoppable. Now I will unleash this power. Ha!" Amidst his maniacal laughter, Garush hacked open the lock of the huge box beside him with his axe. When the lid of the box, which was big enough to contain an ogre, popped open, a purple heart the size of a carriage was revealed. A terrifying heart. Yashaji's heart. Even after 25,000 years, even after every blood vessel connected to the heart had been severed, the heart, which contained terrifying evil power, was still beating without stopping. Zhu Talon raised his head subconsciously and saw that in the grass not far away, colorful insects were fleeing in all directions, subconsciously trying to get away from Yashaji's heart. A pitiful butterfly flew past, but it was only touched by the evil aura coming from the heart before it was annihilated in the black flames. Zhu Talon lowered his head in pain. Then he raised his head again and cursed fiercely, "One day, you will be punished for this crime." Ha! Ha! It had been a long time since Garush was this happy. He laughed wildly, mocking his opponent who had lost the ability to fight. After laughing, he had vented his anger. His face became ferocious and cruel again. He opened his bloody mouth to the widest, revealing a mouthful of fangs. "Who dares to punish me?" Accompanied by his arrogant declaration, he threw Yashaji's heart into a round hole in the pool of life in front of the ancient Fiend Mountain Palace. That was where the essence of the entire pool of life was gathered. Boom! A huge black pillar of evil light, so thick that it would take at least 30 people to wrap their arms around it, soared into the sky. The beam of light emitting a terrifying evil aura could be clearly seen from 100 kilometers away. In Garush's widened eyes, there was no longer any clarity in his pupils. Black smoke covered his eyes. At this moment, everyone who was still fighting in Splendid Valley felt that the laws of Splendid Valley were deviating. Life, nature, kindness, all good things seemed to be leaving him in fear. The evil power of the ancient god Xianxia, which only existed in legends, was descending. Its irresistible power not only tainted the entire Splendid Valley's water of life, it even used it as nourishment to corrode the entire valley. The greenery in Splendid Valley disappeared after being covered by Xianxia's black energy, turning into a lifeless black color. Streams of black water shot up into the sky. The terror of the ancient gods had used this method to announce that they had taken control of everything here. Haha. As proof of my power, you will be my first sacrifice. Garush raised his blood roar high in the air. Just as Garush was about to finish off the attack with his axe, a slender, agile and deadly figure suddenly appeared behind him. Backstep. A pair of top-notch epic grade daggers stabbed straight into his back. Brainless Roar, who had been strengthened by the evil aura, not only had his body been greatly strengthened, but so had his reactions. He twisted his body violently like a whirlwind, forcibly nullifying the judgment of backstab. In the end, he was only stabbed by 2 normal attacks. Before the Brainless Roar could finish sensing death, another lithe figure had appeared behind Zhou Xian. Bang! It was a smoke grenade. The other party did not attack. Instead, they used the smoke grenade as cover. When Brainless Roar used his hand to clear the smoke, he discovered that a man and a woman with similar equipment had already activated Sprint and were carrying Zhou Xian away. Humph! Garush did not chase after them. His body was filled with arrogance. Perhaps at this moment in his heart, a scumbag like Zhou Xian was no longer worth chasing after. Just like that, he allowed Van Cleef and his daughter to rescue Zhou Xian. What happened next was to follow the original development of history. When the Mantis Men staged the scene of 49 years of defecting to Old Jiang, the entire Alliance Throne Conference burst into laughter. In Du Mok's eyes, this was no different from a man who wanted to be a eunuch but castrated himself only to find out that the last emperor of the Celestial Empire was dead. Alright, it's time to end this farce. With Duque's order, the Alliance army finally entered Pandaria's airspace. Life on the Pandaria continent was extremely primitive. They worked at sunrise and rested at sunset. Apart from the Panda Men who were resisting the Mantis Men at the Great Wall, many Panda Men lived a rather peaceful life before the arrival of the Horde. After all, other than the Mantis Men and the Demonkin Ancients, the Panda Men had no mortal enemies on this continent. But on this day, every Panda Man looked at the sky with a slightly blank expression. Buzz, buzz, buzz. It seemed that an endless number of airships filled the entire sky. Those that were over 100 meters long and relatively slender were destroyers. Those that were close to 200 meters long and slightly larger were cruisers. The largest ones, at least 250 meters long, were battleships. These battleships all had huge propellers on both sides, but these propellers only maintained a minimum rotation. It was not them that provided the huge levitating force but the magic net. In addition to the dense hedgehog-like anti-aircraft artillery clusters installed under the airships, there were also a large number of magic patterns. It was these magic circuits that flickered with mysterious light that were connected to the magic net and provided the power for them to float in the air. Thousands of ships, coupled with small aircraft as well as a large number of griffins, hippogriffs and other birds, looked like they could cover the sky. If it weren't for Emperor Xiaohao appearing in almost all the Panda Men's dreams and saying that the Panda Men had joined the alliance, this scene might have caused the greatest panic. In the traditional territory of the Panda Men, the alliance fleet was still very quiet. The ships merely sailed past at high speed and headed straight for the Horde army in the Splendid Valley. However, on the high-altitude outlying islands in the western part of Pandaria that were far from the mainland and only connected by bridges, Mantis Plateau, the alliance fleet began to bombard the ground with artillery. Chapter 1957. Bang! Amidst the shrill and violent explosion, a Mantis Man was directly blasted into the sky. His entire body was green and he had strong limbs. As he was blasted away, his entire body disintegrated into countless pieces of different sizes under the terrifying power of the TNT gunpowder. Wow! Hearing the observer's report, the Alliance gunner who opened fire let out a strange cry of joy. No Alliance member cared about the Mantis Man's life or death. Many even thought that these monsters deserved to die. In a secret room in Naxxramas, Onyxia was lying on her exclusive bed of gold coins. No one could understand her or many dragons' passion and love for gold coins. By the way, why did the Alliance do so much this time? Couldn't they just destroy the Horde? The Black Dragon Princess asked directly. In fact, it wasn't just her who wanted to ask. Many people in Duke's harem wanted to know. For example, Kalia was quite dissatisfied with Duke's method of fishing and enforcing the law, but the well-behaved her chose to remain silent. Not objecting did not mean that she agreed. At this time, Jaina, Tyrande, and the other girls were also looking at Duke. Duke pursed his lips. That's right. I also think that letting Garush go to Pandaria, then letting him obtain the power of Yashaji's heart, and then using this as an excuse to destroy the Horde seems a bit redundant. Just the Horde declaring war on the Alliance is enough to destroy the Horde, isn't it? Yes. Jaina, Lucia, and Aurelia, who had a bad impression of the Horde, all felt the same way. Duke shrugged. The original purpose of the Alliance was to fight against the Horde invading Azeroth. That's right. But over the years, the Alliance has become a coalition of righteous organizations centered on Azeroth to fight against the Burning Legion, the ancient gods and other evil gods, as well as the evil elemental lords. Duke emphasized. Since we call ourselves righteous, we have no reason to kill an entire intelligent race that has nothing to do with evil. Everyone finally understood that the Horde was an organization and the Beastmen were a race. The two could not be confused. Kalia raised her slender hand. Then, is it just to let Garush spread the power of Yashaji? Duke sighed. First of all, Garush is the great chief of the tribe, not the Alliance or anyone in the Alliance. Secondly, the one who single-handedly put Garush on the throne of the great chieftain was Thrall. And the ones who agreed with him, worshipped him, and approved of his every action were none other than the majority of the orcs who were traditional orcs. Duke pressed his hands on the armrests of his chair. If Garush is the culprit that led to the destruction of the Horde and the imminent extinction of the Beastmen, then every Beastman or his supporters is an accomplice. They're the ones who mechanically copied Draenor's barbaric laws of survival and applied them to Azeroth. When Duke said this, Jaina sneered. Isn't it? When they could defeat the humans, they would slaughter every single human in the village. When they couldn't win, they would be captured. They didn't have the awareness of a loser at all. They actually had the nerve to preach in the new tribe that Beastmen will never be slaves and made themselves into victims. Do they really think we've all lost our memories? Queen Sylvanas was the most radical. She raised her hand, and a sharp blade made of pure air elements turned from nothingness into a solid object and fell into her hand. She nimbly played with this dagger-like thing, her eyes cold. The elves will never forget the crime of burning down the Eversong forest. Kalia asked Duke, if the Horde did not use the power of Yashaji and only fought with the Alliance with their current strength, what would the Alliance do after winning? Duke sighed and shook his head. That's an untenable assumption. A long time ago in the future I saw they still chose this path. But if that's the case, probably, after defeating the Horde, I will exile all the former members of the Horde to Draenor. What else was there on Draenor? A continent that was collapsing day by day with fewer and fewer resources. Now, except for the necessary sentry towers, the Alliance and the Horde had almost withdrawn all their manpower from the Draenor Void continent. Isn't this still asking them to wait for death? Kalia was a little sympathetic. Jaina was agitated. Azeroth doesn't belong to them at all. They are downright invaders. In the past, the Burning Legion gave us too much pressure. Duke only brought those traditional beastmen from Draenor to Azeroth for the sake of fighting evil together and for the sake of humanitarianism. But, enough, Kalia. Look at how these despicable green-skinned people are treating us. As soon as they gained a foothold, they couldn't wait to provide us with endless territory for them to hunt. We refused and they directly declared war on us. How can we keep such ingrates? Kalia was speechless for a moment. This was a clash of ideals. As the native inhabitants of Azeroth, humans certainly had no obligation to welcome outsiders to share the resources and land of this world. Duke waved his hand and stopped the argument. He continued in one breath. This assumption of yours is meaningless in itself. Regardless of whether it was for the sake of racial reproduction or to make the tribe stronger, the tribe members led by Garush threw themselves into the arms of the ancient gods whose goal was to destroy the world. This is the reality. The tribe crossed the line. If it was a competition between different races for survival resources, then we could still negotiate. We could even give up our technology to increase the capacity of the land for the population. I have the creativity and the idea, and I can do it. I'm sure everyone has seen the hybrid rice that I had my subordinates develop. More yield per moo, more food and less land to feed more people. But the barbaric and violent Garush, with his weak intelligence and reckless personality, directly chose the most terrifying path. He knew that it was the temptation of the ancient god Ashak, but he still chose to accept the power of destruction. Does everyone know what the ancient gods did back then? If not for the descent of the Pantheon Titan, the soul of Azeroth would have been completely corroded, the earth would have collapsed, and even the entire planet would have been drained dry and fallen into destruction. This is the reason why the Alliance will not tolerate the existence of the ancient gods and the Burning Legion. The women in the harem were silent. This was the final conclusion. Perhaps the Alliance did indeed suppress the survival space of the tribe, but the two organizations with different ideals and different composition were originally competitors. Since the tribe chose the most terrifying path of destruction, then it must be truly destroyed. Chapter 1958. On the other side, Sal became more and more uneasy. As a Messiah shaman who had saved the world during the Great Cataclysm, the Alliance recognized his merits and gave Sal full freedom in the Alliance territory despite the war with the Horde. Except for the Alliance's military base, the residences of various countries' politicians, and the core official places, Sal was allowed to come and go freely. However, Sal would be surrounded by a special team of paladins as guards to prevent the people who did not know the truth from overreacting to Sal because of the war. Since the last visit to Woking hoping to form a Horde rebel army was rejected, Sal found the Tauren who was living on Sardo Island. The Tauren patriarch, Ben, received Sal but ruthlessly rejected Sal's proposal. Even if Sal mentioned that it was likely that someone else had poisoned him, Ben roared at Sal in agitation. That's right, Garush may not be despicable, but he is indeed an out-and-out villain and an idiot. For the sake of you, Sal, I can even forgive him for killing my father. But I absolutely cannot tolerate that he actually supported the Tauren traitor Magatha Grim Totem, who is likely to have killed my father, to occupy the Tauren territory. This is the greatest blasphemy to the spirit of our ancestors. So, the Horde is finished. The moment you gave in to those brainless traditional orcs and gave the position of great chieftain to a brainless idiot, the Horde was finished. You don't have to persuade me. It is impossible for me and my people to join the Horde again. The Tauren can no longer trust a so-called ally who once stabbed them in the back. Thrall, who was in pain, finally borrowed the Alliance's teleportation portal and airship to come to the new Undercity. He found his last old friend Dranos Salyafar, whom he had wanted to groom into a great chief, the current leader of the Forsaken. Once again Sal was splashed with cold water. Sal, did you know? In order to create Focusing Rainbow and destroy the Alliance's fortress, Garush actually promised Anastrian the position of the Forsaken leader. Sal's heart skipped a beat. Different races, different positions. Garush had undoubtedly crossed the line again by doing this. If the great chieftain could replace the leader of a horde at will, what else would he not dare to do? Garush stopped seeing me as an orc a long time ago. In his eyes, I was a beastman loser who couldn't even be compared to a dead human. Losers have no right. Their only duty was to serve as cannon fodder for the tribe. Be it me or the entire Forgotten Ones, we are just his tools of war. But this. Sal was interrupted before he could finish. He's not the only one who thinks this way. The orcs of the traditional faction all think this way. Currently, the majority of the Forgotten Ones were once beastmen. When we were alive, we fought for the tribe until the last drop of blood, and we are still willing to fight for the tribe after death. But the tribe today is no longer our tribe. Thrall, do you understand? Sal's mouth was full of bitterness. He wanted to say, I understand. But he could not bring himself to say it. Once he said such hypocritical words as a living person, he wouldn't be able to forgive himself. In the end, there was only a sigh. All the former allies had abandoned the tribe. Was this really the fault of Garush alone? Sal felt helpless and desperate. He lacked information, especially first-hand information. After he was no longer the great chief, it was even more difficult for him to get information about the Alliance. He had to hire neutral mercenaries in Gadgetsan. The Alliance had kept this war strictly confidential. Most people and soldiers only knew that there was a war with the tribe, but they didn't know what the war was like. After the Alliance announced that they had found traces of the ancient evil god Xianxia on the misty Pandaria, they stopped advancing on the territory of the Kalimdor tribe and maintained the line of battle. Large numbers of ships were seen setting off from the various military ports of the Alliance and flying south of the Endless Sea. Sal could not figure out the military structure of the Alliance. He only knew that at least half of the Alliance's airships and sea fleets had not moved. It was impossible for such a large fleet to stay in the port without knowing. If they attacked, outsiders might not know where the fleet had gone in the vast sea. The fleet hiding in the port couldn't be deceived. The fleet was on standby. Tens of thousands of Air Force soldiers took advantage of the rotation and ran out to the taverns of the military port to brag. There were too many signs to infer the military strength of the Alliance. Sal came to a sad conclusion. The Alliance used less than half of their military strength to fight on two fronts. While dealing with the tribe, they could also take care of Xianxia. The pained Sal completely gave up on treatment. He went to the state guest house in Storm City and asked for the corresponding treatment. He was waiting for the moment when the Alliance destroyed Garush's so-called Orthodox tribe. In Pandaria, the Alliance's purge of the tribe continued. Brainless roar through Xianxia's heart in Splendid Valley, which directly caused Splendid Valley to be blown up. When the great chief needed someone to volunteer to receive the infusion of Xianxia's power, Marco Rock stood up without hesitation. If Garush was given enough time, he could definitely turn the entire tribal army into a terrifying humanoid monster with terrifying attack power like Marco Rock. Unfortunately, since the start of the ancient road, Duque had been consciously reducing the tribe's military strength to guard against this move. Almost as soon as Garush threw Xianxia's heart into the pool, the Alliance's air force arrived at the south and north of Splendid Valley. They were just waiting outside the mountain peaks for orders. Brainless Roar had just injected less than 100 people with Xianxia's power when the Alliance's cannons arrived. Boom. Boom. Don't be fooled by the fact that the Alliance only used heavy artillery to open up a path. For the current tribe, it was just one move and they could eat all over the world. Other than Markarok, who had just successfully transformed, the tribe really didn't have any good way to deal with the Alliance's air force. Markarok's new move made Brainless Roar's eyes light up. Xianxia's aura Markarok connected with Xianxia's power and shot out a light cannon. It crossed a distance of 500 meters and hit a scout ship that was too close to the ground. The captain of the Alliance destroyer didn't expect the tribe to do this. He wanted to rely on his ship's speed and agility to seek death. Through close observation, he would be able to accurately guide the cannons from behind. In the end, the boss-level Markarok hit it and used Xianxia's shadow energy cannon to blow it up. Unfortunately, Markarok's bravery alone couldn't change the tribe's disadvantage. Chapter 1959. Not every warrior of the tribe could have the title, boss, behind their names. After all, not everyone had the talent or circumstances to do so. Most horde warriors would go from muscleheads to demonized muscleheads after drinking the shadow energy pumped out of Xianxia's heart. Purple crystal horns grew from all parts of his body. Although orcs didn't look like humans, their history was always strikingly similar. 30 years ago, Garush's father, Grom, drank the demon's blood and turned from reddish-brown to green-skinned, gaining power. It was like reincarnation. This time it was his son's turn. But it was still the traditional orcs who caused trouble. None of the orcs present felt that there was anything wrong. In Naxxramas, a tall, burly green figure appeared beside Duque. His translucent body told the world that he was a heroic spirit. Grom Hellscream. He had become the first orc to demonize under Ghoul Dan's bewitchment. Duque could do many things, but there were some things that he didn't want to hide from his own people. Grom's mouth was trembling and bean-sized tears slid down his bold cheeks. He knew that the Horde had declared war on the Alliance. When there was no war, he was more like a bystander, quietly watching the development of the Alliance and the Horde. As a super old warrior who had experienced 3 battles at the Dark Portal, he had seen more and knew more than ordinary orcs. He never thought that he was a good father. He just followed the way his father had taught him and taught Garush, if you didn't count the years when the Dark Portal was closed. Deep down in his heart, he was proud that his son had become the great chief, but he had never imagined that it would be his son who would bring the tribe to its current state of eternal damnation. Seeing his son walk the same path as him but one that could easily destroy the horde, he was angry and full of grievances. But this anger couldn't be vented because he was no longer a member of the horde. He couldn't even be considered an orc. After his chest heaved up and down dozens of times, Grom finally turned and left. "I have no objections." Dooku sighed but still put down his hand heavily. That was the signal for war. "Open fire." "Yes, all cannons fire." The orders from the Alliance Command Center were passed down layer by layer. The once beautiful and tranquil Splendid Valley was immediately devastated for the second time. Bang, bang, bang. The fierce cannons used shotguns similar to the Type 3 round. Relatively speaking, the destruction caused by such cannons wasn't too great and could be easily dealt with in the future. At this time, the Pandaren army had already retreated, and the tribal soldiers who were still exposed on the ground were instantly annihilated. The horde soldiers who had not been strengthened by the power of the ancient gods were so fragile in front of the modern cannons. The Alliance's current armor-piercing technology was enough to pierce through the scales and thick skin of an adult twilight dragon. Tribesmen soldiers were nothing to them. They didn't give Gurus any chance to strengthen his army. The Alliance used half an hour of shotguns to clear out all the tribes on the surface. This part of the tribe did not represent the entire tribe. The horde had gained some experience from the Alliance's bombardment. When the ear-piercing sound of the cannons rang out, the tribal warriors had already automatically found cover. The orcs hadn't learned to hide in the craters, but they at least learned to lie down when they were hit. Other than the top-grade armor of professionals, there was no metal armor that could help ordinary orc warriors withstand a direct hit from a cannon of more than 100 millimeters. Moreover, the west side of the Pool of Life in Splendid Valley was the excavation site for the Yasha's heart. Before coming here, they had stayed in the underground excavation site, so they were familiar with it. Almost as soon as the cannons rang out, all the soldiers near the excavation site hid there. This time, Gurus saved at least 80% of his soldiers. "Bastard! Damn it!" Brainless Roar angrily destroyed everything he could see. After venting his anger, his divine logic came to a conclusion. There are still too few good soldiers. I need more strong people like Markrock. I want the light of death to fill the sky of Orgrimmar and turn the Alliance's flying battleships into fireballs in the sky. So he seized the opportunity to let every tribal soldier in Splendid Valley drink the black water that contained the power of the Yasha's heart. On the other side, he waited for night to fall. According to the agreement, his flying fleet would come to their aid under the cover of the night. But the Alliance didn't have any airborne troops, so he couldn't find a place to vent his anger. Tonight was a good night for sneaking. The sky was dark and the moon couldn't be seen at all. The Horde army fled in the dark. To avoid being discovered by the Alliance, they didn't even dare to light torches. The Alliance saw how they were burying their heads in the sand. When the Mage's Eye, which was based on the principle of elemental sensing, sent the image of the Horde army's sneaky behavior back to Naxxrama's command center, and the radar clearly showed the movement of the Horde's flying ships, the Alliance command center, which had always been serious, burst into loud laughter. "Enough. You little bastards, if anyone dares to laugh again, I'll give him a fisherman's knife and tell him to get down and charge at Gurus." Bulang Bronzebeard quickly shocked the group of restless operators. In the secret room, Duque sat calmly on the fishing platform and looked at the magic mirror. He crossed his legs and swayed. While munching on melon seeds, he taught William, "See that? If I hadn't released these flying ships, Brainless Roar wouldn't have had the chance to bring back Yashaji's heart. If I hadn't released these flying ships to take away Gurus's men, our soldiers would have had to follow behind the Pandaren and chase those mutated orc warriors all over the mountains and plains." William nodded. Even though he had been in the army for many years and had led an army to participate in many major battles, such as fighting the Lich King, William was still convinced by Duque's strategy of taking advantage of the situation, gathering all the factors for victory before the battle, and crushing the enemy directly after the battle started. This was no longer a simple art of command. This was the standard concept of a strategist. The Horde soldiers finally returned to the familiar flying ships, trembling with fear. Every soldier felt as if they had escaped death, and their hearts that were hanging in their chests could finally be at ease. Next, it was up to the airship team. They had a kind of almost blind trust in their own airships because they had succeeded once. Maybe they could succeed again, right?